During a service shaft, a temporary lift suddenly loses support while activity continues on the platform. A road cleaner stepped into the crosswalk with a broom in hand, while an approaching vehicle continued through the active crossing path. Inside the factory floor, sudden flame activity appeared beside the industrial furnace area, rapidly spreading heat and smoke through the workspace. On a rural roadside, a tractor-trailer vehicle suddenly shifts forward as the wheel enters an occupied travel path beside the roadway. Inside a busy factory line, a secured workpiece turns into stored energy waiting to release through the machine system. During demolition work on an elevated concrete beam, a supporting section was removed and the remaining structure suddenly lost load-bearing stability. At the fuel station, a tire inside the pickup truck suddenly releases pressure and rapidly redirects material movement across the fueling area. In the pipe processing area, a backward step near an exposed rotating section suddenly brought loose fabric too close to the machine's active movement area. On a flatbed truck, an unsecured cylinder becomes a shortcut, then one step turns it into a rolling load. At the facility entrance, the vehicle moves through the narrow gate opening as the short metal barrier suddenly shifts sideways beneath the load. On top of a raised dump trailer, one misplaced step suddenly redirects movement beyond the stable walking surface. During a gate installation, a massive steel frame suddenly drops out of alignment and redirects suddenly from the lift path. High above a dismantling site, an aging antenna mast suddenly lost structural stability as disassembly loads altered the remaining support structure. Inside an offshore industrial platform, a suspended access area suddenly lost structural support beneath active equipment and elevated process infrastructure. While handling a concrete discharge hose, a sudden pressure surge turns the line into a rapid, uncontrolled movement path. Along a roadside utility pole, a ladder rested near active cable lines when sudden electrical activity rapidly destabilized the entire setup. At a truck yard, a trailer entered a narrow lane when pressurized gas was suddenly released near the wheel area. The concrete mixer rolls past the road crew in lay-on as movement enters the truck's limited visibility path beside the rotating wheels. Keep all workers completely outside the blind zones of moving heavy vehicles during road work and active transport operations. Use spotters, exclusion areas, and direct driver communication whenever crews work near reversing, turning, or passing trucks. Along a roadside work area, a tall metal scaffold frame drifted into the clearance space beneath an energized 11 kilovolt overhead line. Overhead electrical clearances can be difficult to judge around tall conductive structures and elevated equipment. The moment a metal frame enters uncertain clearance space, stop movement and verify separation distance before continuing operations. A construction trench suddenly releases hidden underground energy beneath the excavation area, forcing pressure and debris upward through the trench path. Before breaking ground, treat every unverified underground route as live. Confirm utility location, markings, and isolation first, or crews may enter an energized trench without realizing the danger below. Inside the tire storage bay, one stack of tires was intentionally shifted, but the transferred force quietly redirected movement into another tall column position behind it. Do control the movement direction of stacked materials and maintain clear spacing between adjacent vertical loads before attempting to move, reposition, or stabilize stacked storage materials. A wheelbarrow loaded with heavy scrap reached the blast furnace edge. Then the entire load shifted forward at once. Heavy scrap loads near furnace openings require controlled dumping systems, stable walking surfaces, and physical barriers to prevent forward pull hazards. At the rocky burial site, the suspended casket shifts during positioning above the lowering area and redirects movement during the lift operation. Keep all personnel outside the lift path during casket lowering, positioning, or suspended load handling operations. Use controlled rigging, stable footing, and clear exclusion zones to prevent shifting loads from entering occupied areas during the lift. A truck and forklift begin moving together, turning the narrow space between them into a rapidly narrowing movement path beside the loading area. The moment you step between moving machines, safe movement paths disappear. Never trust hand signals alone when visibility, driver awareness, and physical separation have not been fully established. At a road paving site in Brazil, a moving machine rolled through the work zone when one of its tires suddenly released stored pressure under heavy load. Heavy industrial tires operating under high pressure can rapidly lose structural stability when heat buildup, fatigue, overinflation, or damaged rim assemblies weaken the containment system. Once pressure integrity is lost during movement, expanding force can rapidly redirect surrounding tire and wheel components through the work area. At a material handling area, a suspended load suddenly broke free from control, turning a routine lift into an uncontrolled falling load. Suspended loads require protected exclusion zones and continuous load control until all load forces are transferred to a stable support surface and the material is fully secured. On the gravel roadside in Thailand, pressure suddenly releases from the vacuum truck tank and rapidly spreads through the hose handling area. Vent, depressurize, and gas test enclosed waste tanks before welding, cutting, striking, or performing maintenance around septic or vacuum systems. Keep ignition sources away from confined waste tanks. Inside a crowded container yard, a heavy container handler continued reversing through a narrow transport lane between stacked cargo rows. Reversing container handlers create expanding blind zones and restricted clearance travel paths between stacked cargo rows. Whenever separation distance becomes uncertain, stop movement and verify the travel lane remains completely clear before changing direction. A suspended construction load suddenly loses support above the construction area, redirecting debris and dust through the surrounding lift path and equipment zone. Never, ever allow access or material staging beneath suspended construction loads or lifting operations without exclusion zones, signal coordination, and verified rigging stability procedures. On a nighttime collection route, a waste truck stopped along the roadside when a speeding vehicle suddenly entered the rear loading area. Garbage trucks operating during active roadside collection create a high-risk rear traffic exposure for anyone positioned behind the vehicle. Low visibility, limited reaction distance, and fast-moving traffic can rapidly turn the rear collection area into an unstable work zone when approaching drivers do not recognize stationary equipment ahead. Inside a storage and packaging area, an ignition source reached stacked combustible materials and rapidly expanded the active fuel area. Keep ignition sources separated from combustible storage and maintain clear fire prevention zones around electrical equipment and hot work activities. Control fuel sources before they can support rapid fire growth. Inside the warehouse loading bay, the forklift reverses with stacked containers elevated when the load suddenly shifts sideways across the forks. Keep elevated forklift loads fully secured, balanced, and centered before reversing or repositioning through loading areas. Lower unstable loads before movement because raised weight can rapidly reduce forklift stability during travel. Inside a storage room packed with stacked material bags, an unsupported brick wall suddenly lost structural support beside a designated resting area. Structural cracks, shifting loads, and unsupported masonry indicate active stability hazards. Any visible movement, separation, or deterioration should trigger immediate reassessment of the surrounding area. Inside a factory workshop, loose material drifted too close to an exposed rotating machine, and movement rapidly transferred through the machine system beside energized rollers and rotating components. Entanglement starts before contact. Anything loose on your body becomes part of the machine path once it enters the reach of exposed rollers, belts, shafts, or rotating components. During a forklift lifting operation, a suspended machine was being guided near the fork carriage when the lowering forks suddenly redirected into the same work area. Guiding suspended equipment too close to the active load path places personnel inside the movement range of both the forks and the suspended load, where even small lowering adjustments can rapidly reduce available working clearance. During exterior construction work, a ladder suddenly moved outside its stable support position. Ladders require secured top and base support, verified footing conditions, and maintained stability throughout the access period. Any potential for sliding, shifting, or loss of support must be eliminated before the ladder remains in service. Inside the residential courtyard, fuel spreads across the hot charcoal as heat rapidly travels back along the vapor path toward the container. Keep flammable liquids completely away from open flames, hot charcoal, and active cooking fires during ignition or refueling. Use approved fire-starting methods and sealed fuel storage away from heat sources to reduce vapor path ignition hazards. At a pavement block worksite, one loose slab turns a normal walkway into a hidden floor opening exposure. Incomplete pavement surfaces can conceal unsupported openings and unstable walking areas. Any loose, displaced, or unsecured slab should be treated as a potential loss of support hazard until verified stable. Inside a warehouse storage area, a tightly wounded steel coil was adjusted when the entire roll suddenly unraveled, redirecting stored force through nearby storage racks and material paths. Stored tension is invisible until it releases. Never approach a wound steel coil without restraints, and a controlled release plan or hidden energy can redirect rapidly through nearby access and material areas. Inside a steaming industrial cooking area, dense vapor suddenly swallowed visibility beside a massive open boiling vat. Large open containers filled with boiling liquid create combined heat, visibility, and surface stability hazards inside confined production spaces. Steam clouds can rapidly reduce orientation, while wet flooring, unstable footing, and heat buildup near the vat edge can quickly redirect movement into the exposed operating area. A long metal ladder was lowered across the rooftop during repositioning beside overhead utilities. Then it entered the overhead power line clearance space. Ladder work near overhead utilities requires pre-planned placement, non-conductive equipment, and controlled lowering paths away from energized lines. Inside the electrical switchgear room, intense electrical activity suddenly spreads across the energized cabinet and surrounding panels. Isolate and verify zero energy before opening or working near electrical switchgear and energized panels. Use arc flash protection and rated PPE whenever exposure to energized equipment remains possible. At a roadside construction site, a tall brick retaining wall suddenly releases its entire load path without warning. Retaining wall stability can change rapidly when ground support conditions shift. Cracking, leaning sections, vibration, or soil movement indicate that load paths may no longer be adequately supported. At a steel loading bay, movement occurred around stacked metal frames when a suspended load suddenly shifted off balance above nearby unstable storage racks. Do not trust steel that looks parked. Until every section is stacked, supported, and restrained, assume one shift could redirect thousands of pounds through the surrounding storage area. Inside an industrial tank area, routine welding suddenly triggered a rapid pressure release around the enclosed vessel. Hot work near enclosed tanks, residual vapors, pressurized systems, or unverified contents can instantly create dangerous ignition conditions inside confined industrial spaces. Welding operations must never begin until atmospheric testing, isolation, ventilation, and energy verification are fully completed. Tree cutting operations disturbed a hidden hive beside the elevated lift, then swarm activity rapidly expanded beyond the immediate cutting area. Tree cutting near potential hive locations requires pre-inspection, sealed protective systems, and controlled disturbance procedures before cutting begins. On a narrow roadway, an overloaded pickup rounds the curve as fast-moving traffic suddenly enters the shared lane beside the vehicle. Transport workers only in approved passenger seating with proper restraints. Keep cargo beds clear of unsecured passengers, especially on narrow roads, sharp curves, and active traffic routes where sudden vehicle movement can rapidly reduce occupant stability. A heavy cargo truck rolls onto an aging wooden bridge, and the structure suddenly exceeds its remaining load-carrying capacity. Bridge crossings require verification of load ratings, structural condition, and support integrity before heavy vehicles enter aging or deteriorated spans. In a snow-covered backyard, a long timber beam was left unsupported for just a moment. and gravity immediately redirected the unsupported load across the unstable icy surface. Temporary balance is not real stability. When footing is uneven or slick, even one unattended beam can redirect its weight faster than a person can recover. Inside the steel processing bay, a suspended metal load suddenly shifted above the storage rows as part of the material rapidly redirected into the active work area. Overhead, lifting paths become unstable the moment suspended material loses balanced tension, especially when movement develops near the swing radius or projected load route. Do maintain controlled exclusion areas beneath suspended material and verify stable rigging before guided movement begins. On a concrete construction floor, an extension ladder suddenly redirected backward as upward movement transferred force through the unsecured base. An extension ladder placed on smooth concrete without anchoring or stabilization creates a hidden slide path where climbing force can rapidly overcome available surface grip and redirect the ladder away from stable positioning. During maintenance beneath an industrial machine, stored energy was unexpectedly restored, and the equipment suddenly returned to motion before energy isolation was verified. Energy isolation systems must remain fully locked, verified, and protected until all stored electrical, hydraulic, pneumatic, mechanical, and gravitational energy sources are reduced to a zero-energy state. Machine movement capability must remain eliminated before access to the machine envelope is permitted. Inside a wide warehouse loading bay, a reversing box truck moves deeper into the blind area as rear visibility narrows behind the trailer. Keep pedestrian paths separated from reversing truck routes inside loading areas. Use spotters, warning signals, and direct driver communication whenever trailers block rear visibility or blind zones extend behind the vehicle. During storm cleanup on a residential street, a pulled tree suddenly entered the clearance space around energized overhead power lines. Tree removal near energized conductors requires controlled movement, verified clearance distances, and utility coordination whenever limbs or trunks can enter electrical approach boundaries. Inside a pipe storage area, movement shifted near an uncovered floor opening as stacked pipes suddenly redirected movement beside unsecured material racks and narrow access paths. Two overlooked hazards can combine fast. An exposed opening and unsecured rolling material can remove stable movement and available clearance at the exact same moment. Inside the workshop, material positioning adjustments were being made near an industrial press when the machine suddenly returned to active movement. Entering the operating space of energized press equipment places personnel inside the movement range of stored mechanical energy whenever automatic cycling or unintended machine motion remains active during adjustment work. The motorcycle moved beneath the overhead line. Then a raised stick suddenly entered the energized clearance space above the canal path. Travel near overhead electrical lines requires strict clearance control for long objects, poles, sticks, pipes, and elevated materials. Energized lines can transfer electrical energy through nearby conductive paths when minimum clearance distances are lost. Beside a roadside bus, unstable pressure suddenly releases from an overinflated tire during air filling and rapidly redirects movement through the wheel assembly area. Stay outside the direct pressure release area of heavy vehicle tires during inflation and pressure checks. Use pressure controls, remote air lines, and safe standoff distance whenever servicing large wheel assemblies. A crane holds massive suspended equipment in position. Then the lifting system suddenly loses load support above the active lift zone. Suspended loads require continuous exclusion zones and verified rigging integrity until all load forces are transferred to a stable support surface. At an industrial entry gate, a shortcut through a partially open rolling barrier turned into a moving pinch point within seconds beside active vehicle traffic flow. Shortcuts create blind trust in moving systems. If a gate has not fully stopped, assume it can still close and never enter an unfinished movement path while the system remains in motion. Inside the fabrication bay, a suspended steel load suddenly redirected sideways as crane tension tightened against an unbalanced lift point. Off-centered hoisting creates hidden pendulum force. The moment lifting tension begins redirecting a load toward its center of gravity, causing suspended steel to move laterally through the lift path. The extension ladder looked secure against the porch roof. Then the balance suddenly shifted outside the ladder's stable support range. Ladder work near elevated roofs and porch structures requires stable top support, controlled body positioning, and secured contact points before climbing. Sudden upper body balance shifts can destabilize the ladder's entire center of gravity. On a narrow resurfacing lane, a road roller crawls beside the concrete wall as a motorcycle falls by the limited visibility area beside the steel drum. Stay completely clear of the blind zones around moving rollers and compaction equipment during road work. Use separated traffic lanes, spotters, and controlled access to keep motorcycles and pedestrians out of the machine's travel path. On a ship deck during rigging operations, a loaded mooring line suddenly released stored tension energy across the deck. Tensioned lines store large amounts of potential energy that can be released instantly when load paths fail. Identify and isolate recoil zones before loading or adjusting mooring systems. Inside a busy workplace corridor, a container suddenly released its contents, turning the walking path into a slick hazard in seconds beside moving carts and continuous corridor movement. The injury often happens after the spill, not during it. The moment footing changes, stop moving and reassess before momentum turns one bad step into a secondary incident. Inside the marble storage area, a suspended stone slab lifted free from the rack, and the adjacent slab behind it suddenly shifted out of stable alignment. Layered stone storage can rapidly lose stability when front retaining pressure is removed, especially when adjacent slabs depend on shared balance instead of independent securing support. The truckload looked perfectly stacked, then one unsecured red roll suddenly moved outside its restrained position during unloading. Cargo transport and unloading require secured load restraint, stable stacking, and controlled unloading zones around elevated trailer beds. Cylindrical loads can rapidly roll or slide once restraint tension is lost. At the frozen fuel depot, unstable heat and smoke rapidly spread across the tanker platform during transfer. Operations: verify grounding, vapor control, and static protection before entering or working on fuel tankers during transfer operations. Keep all ignition sources isolated while fuel vapors are present around loading platforms and tanker connections. During hammering work beside heavy equipment, one missed strike suddenly redirects the full swing into the adjacent work path. Hammering operations require maintained separation from active strike paths, rebound paths, and adjacent work areas. Any change in strike angle can rapidly redirect impact force outside the intended contact point. Along a windy shoreline, a climb up. A leaning palm tree suddenly redirected weight and momentum suddenly above the unstable sandy surface. A leaning structure is already signaling instability. Before climbing higher, read what the tree, wind, and ground are telling you about where failure may already be starting. Inside a tight automatic car wash lane, a single open car door suddenly turned the narrow exit path into a rapidly narrowing pinch path beside moving wash equipment. Pinch points form faster than people react. Once a conveyor is moving, never place yourself where a door, wall, or vehicle can erase your exit path. Inside the unfinished structure, demolition blows struck a load-bearing wall section until weakened masonry suddenly shifted beneath the elevated work platform. Manual demolition around structural support zones can rapidly redirect load forces through weakened masonry, causing surrounding walls and platforms to lose stable support without obvious surface indicators. Inside the warehouse aisle, a pallet jack left across the walking path suddenly created a low visibility obstruction as fast movement crossed the blocked floor area. Unattended pallet jacks positioned in active walkways create low visibility obstruction hazards where exposed forks and raised handles can suddenly interfere with walking movement and reduce stable footing. During retaining wall construction inside an excavation, a large rock suddenly lost support along the upper slope and entered the downslope movement path. Excavation faces slopes, stockpiles, and spoil piles require continuous stability assessment. Loose rock, unsupported material, erosion, vibration, or weakened ground conditions indicate active downslope movement hazards. Gravity constantly acts on rock and soil along excavation walls. When support is reduced by vibration, erosion, weathering, or excavation activity, material can detach and accelerate downslope with little warning. Material movement can rapidly expand from upper slopes into lower excavation zones. Stabilize slopes, remove loose material, and secure excavation boundaries before operations continue. Inside an unfinished room filled with loose masonry and dust, one sharp impact suddenly shifts the unstable wall section across the work area. Brace and verify masonry wall stability before working, leaning, or applying force near unsupported structures. Keep work areas clear of unstable walls until supports, anchoring, and structural checks are fully completed. Inside a valve factory production line, a pressurized control valve suddenly lost pressure containment within the assembly area. Pressurized systems can retain stored energy even when appearing isolated or inactive. Pressure isolation and controlled energy release must be verified before equipment access or testing begins. Beside a roadside construction site, a metal frame touched an energized line, and the moment the frame was grabbed, the entire structure became energized. Electricity can travel through what looks harmless. If metal contacts an overhead line, assume the entire structure is energized until isolation is confirmed from a safe distance. On a rain-slick roadway, an excavator moved through traffic when its massive front section suddenly redirected into a nearby pedestrian travel area. Mobile excavation equipment creates a severe visibility and movement hazard whenever pedestrian travel overlaps with active machine operating zones. Large tires, elevated attachments, and restricted operator sightlines can rapidly obscure nearby movement around the machine's forward structure, especially during turning or repositioning. During a pipe lifting operation, a suspended pipe transferred force into a metal rod positioned beneath the load path, creating sudden stored energy movement. Load-supporting tools, temporary supports, and positioning devices can store and redirect force when placed beneath suspended loads. Support methods must be engineered, restrained, and capable of maintaining stable load transfer throughout the lift. Inside a crowded fabrication shop, sparks spread around the massive steel tank as unstable pressure rapidly releases through the vessel. Vent, isolate, clean, and gas test all tanks and pressure vessels before welding, cutting, or applying heat. Keep enclosed vessels completely free of trapped pressure and flammable gases before starting any hot work. Inside a metal workshop, a rotating lathe created an active entanglement path near the exposed spindle area. Exposed rotating components generate continuous draw-in forces around spindles, chucks, and rotating workpieces. Maintain guarded separation from all active rotation. Paths. Inside a busy warehouse loading zone, a forklift turned through a shared walkway, and the gap between machine and clear movement space vanished instantly. Shared space creates shared risk. When people and forklifts use the same path, visibility assumptions eventually replace verified separation. Separate the movement before that mistake happens. High above the yard, a ladder leaned into a tree branch. Moments before, the cut section suddenly redirected the support, stabilizing the entire setup. Ladders positioned against branches or unstable natural supports can rapidly lose stable positioning when cutting forces change the structure, providing balance and resistance. While a concrete truck reversed toward a work area, restricted clearance and expanding blind zones overlapped with the active vehicle travel path. Reversing vehicles require protected exclusion zones, controlled travel paths, and verified separation distances wherever blind zones and restricted clearance areas exist. Large trucks create extensive blind zones around the chassis, body, and rear travel area. During reversing, vehicle momentum and restricted sightlines reduce the available margin for movement correction within the travel path. Reversing operations create overlapping blind zones and active travel paths. Maintain protected separation areas and controlled vehicle routing throughout backing maneuvers. Inside a narrow warehouse aisle, the forklift moves deeper into the blind area as movement enters the machine's travel route. Stay completely out of forklift blind zones and reversing paths inside active warehouse aisles. Confirm visual contact and clear travel space before entering any area around moving industrial vehicles. Inside a warehouse loading area, a forklift lifted a stacked crate load when the pallet suddenly moved outside its stable support position. Leaning pallets, uneven weight distribution, and shifting load geometry indicate reduced stability during lifting operations. Stop the lift and restore load stability before continuing movement. Inside a fabrication shop, a large flexible panel suddenly lifted like a sail, and the entire sheet rapidly redirected upward through nearby equipment and storage areas. Large flexible materials can become airborne without warning. If the panel can catch wind or bend under force, control its movement before uncontrolled movement develops. On a backyard roof edge, a long extension ladder suddenly shifted sideways, and the entire setup turned unstable in seconds. Ladders rarely fail without warning. The mistake is ignoring small instability signals before climbing. If it shifts even slightly on setup, the ladder should never be relied on as the stability test during elevated outdoor repair or maintenance work around unstable roof edges. Extension ladders rely on balanced load distribution and friction at both contact points. When the base slides or the angle becomes too shallow, the center of gravity shifts outward, causing rapid lateral movement and loss of support. A ladder can fail instantly when balance and footing are ignored. Secure the top, stabilize the base, and check the angle before every climb. Inside a cramped construction alley, overloaded scaffolding suddenly shifts inward, and unstable movement spreads through the work area. Use properly braced scaffolding with stable foundations, secured platforms, and verified load limits before allowing access. Inspect scaffold connections and weight distribution continuously, especially in tight construction areas with uneven support conditions. During a forklift demonstration in a crowded loading yard, an unsecured metal panel suddenly moved outside its stable support position beside the machine. Unsecured materials require stable positioning and positive restraint whenever vehicle movement, vibration, or nearby activity can affect load stability. Any leaning, unsupported, or unrestrained panel should be treated as an active movement hazard until secured. A wastewater treatment platform suddenly experienced pressure release from within a confined process system. Pressure irregularities, unusual vibration, gas accumulation, or abnormal process conditions indicate potential stored energy hazards within confined systems. Inside a switchgear control room, unstable electrical energy suddenly spreads from the energized cabinet through the surrounding corridor. Isolate and verify zero energy before opening or working inside electrical cabinets and switchgear systems. Use lockout procedures, arc flash controls, and rated protective equipment whenever energized exposure cannot be eliminated. Beside a delivery truck, a glass panel shifts outward and unstable movement rapidly spreads through the stack along the side of the vehicle. Secure glass panels with stable racks, proper restraints, and verified load balance before unloading or adjusting stacked materials. Keep clear of unstable movement areas during handling and stabilization of large sheet materials, and never rely on manual support to stop a shifting glass load. Large glass sheets carried vertically rely on even support and constant restraint to remain stable during transport and unloading. If one panel shifts outward from vibration, loose restraints, or uneven positioning, changing weight transfer can rapidly destabilize the surrounding stack and redirect movement through adjacent sheets. One shifting panel can destabilize an entire glass stack. A massive concrete ring rolled off the truck toward the landing area when impact forces suddenly exceeded the concrete section's structural integrity. Concrete sections require controlled unloading methods, stable landing surfaces, and managed impact forces throughout handling operations. Structural damage, uneven support, or excessive impact loading can rapidly compromise material integrity and create fragment projection hazards. A parking lot light pole became the primary ladder support the moment stable contact geometry was lost. Never, ever use a leaning light pole as ladder support. Secure the ladder on a stable structure, maintain the correct angle, and keep three-point contact during access. A ladder transfers load through both rails into the surface it rests against. When the support surface flexes or shifts, like a light pole, the center of gravity changes fast, creating uncontrolled ladder movement. Stable access equipment starts with a stable anchor point. If the support moves, the entire climbing path becomes unpredictable. On a muddy construction cut, a backhoe loader works inches from a trench edge as the ground starts telling the real story. Ground failure often announces itself quietly. Soft soil, cracking edges, or sinking tires are your cue to back away before the machine redirects weight beyond the trench edge support area. Inside a cramped repair shop, a pressurized tire sits on the floor until stored air turns the room into a pressure event. Compressed air feels invisible until stored force suddenly releases. Treat every pressurized tire as stored force because one hidden defect can redirect that energy rapidly through the surrounding work area during inflation, handling, inspection, or nearby repair work activities. A tire stores compressed air as stored compressed energy bead, or sidewall failure releases that energy instantly. The bench, walls, and nearby objects can redirect the pressure and loose material through the surrounding repair area. Treat every pressurized tire like stored energy, not rubber. Deflate it, cage it, and control the work area before repair. Inside a fabrication booth, an angle grinder screamed against metal when the spinning cutting disc suddenly broke apart during high-speed rotation. High RPM abrasive discs become severe rotational hazards when damaged wheels, incorrect mounting, side-loading pressure, or overspeed conditions reduce wheel stability. Once rotational integrity is lost, the grinder can rapidly redirect disc material outward from the cutting area. At a steel coil yard, a loose coil suddenly rolled away from a flatbed trailer, turning the loading area into a rapidly moving industrial hazard zone. Steel coils become extremely dangerous the moment rotational movement begins. Attempts to physically stop or redirect several tons of rolling steel place the body directly against unstoppable momentum. The curved surface continuously feeds acceleration forward, while the coil's massive weight converts even slow movement into an overwhelming crushing force. A rolling coil carries both translational and rotational energy at the same time. Once gravity and momentum combine, human-applied friction becomes insignificant against the steel's continuous forward movement. Moving steel coils requires engineered restraints, not human intervention inside the travel path. One uncontrolled roll can rapidly transform stored industrial material into a severe rolling force hazard. The sugarcane crusher looked inactive for a moment. Then the roller feed cycle suddenly re-engaged across the exposed machine rods. Sugarcane crushers and feed roller systems require full lockout isolation and verified shutdown before entering feed beds or accessing machine structures. Automatic processing cycles can restart unexpectedly inside active crushing systems. Inside a warehouse loading area, stretch wrap was being applied to a rotating pallet load when the wrapping process suddenly created a pull-in path around the moving load. Rotating pallet loads require controlled access boundaries and full rotation stoppage before film tension, load position, or wrapping system conditions are altered. Wrapping systems must maintain separation from all loose material, exposed access points, and uncontrolled contact paths while rotation remains active. A rotating pallet load can draw stretch film, packaging material, straps, or other flexible material into the movement path as wrap tension increases around the load. Once tension develops, rotational force and film tension continue increasing with each revolution. Rotating pallet wrappers create continuous draw-in hazards through tension film and moving load surfaces. Maintain full rotation stoppage and controlled access conditions before any change to film tension, load position, or wrapping system configuration. Inside the warehouse, the moving forklift approaches the pedestrian travel route as visibility narrows beside the carried load. Keep pedestrian walkways separated from active forklift lanes inside warehouse work zones. Avoid crossing beside or behind moving forklifts, especially near blindside travel paths and obstructed loads during transport operations. Along the roadside, a loose vehicle tire separates from traffic movement and rapidly redirects across the active work area beside the road. Keep roadside work zones separated from moving traffic with barriers, buffer space, and controlled positioning whenever possible. Stay alert for uncontrolled vehicle movement, loose equipment, and rolling components that can leave the roadway unexpectedly. When a wheel assembly separates from a moving vehicle, it continues carrying forward speed and rotational force from the original vehicle movement. Because the tire remains in rapid rotation, it can continue moving across uneven pavement, curbs, shoulders, or roadside surfaces while repeatedly redirecting its travel path. Vehicle components can unexpectedly leave active traffic routes. A stacked forklift setup balanced a refrigerator near an apartment window when the lifting arrangement moved outside its stable support range. Improvised lifting systems often lack verified load paths, support integrity, and stability margins. Any setup dependent on balance rather than engineered load control should be treated as unstable. A store ladder suddenly lost base traction on the polished tile floor during access. Smooth flooring can significantly reduce ladder traction before visible movement occurs. Ladder stability depends on maintaining controlled contact at both the base and upper support points. When the ladder base slides outward, the climbing angle rapidly increases and shifts the center of gravity backward. Smooth flooring reduces friction, allowing the ladder rails to accelerate like a lever under body weight. A ladder only works when both contact points stay controlled. Once the base starts moving, the entire access path becomes unstable instantly. Inside a warehouse bay, a cardboard box looks harmless until body weight turns packaging into a failed support. Familiar objects create dangerous trust. Just because packaging holds product weight does not mean it can safely support your body balance or sudden movement. At a warehouse loading bay, a forklift turns with a raised carton as the load starts sliding sideways. When a load rises, so does uncertainty. Before turning, lower it first, because even a minor shift can instantly redirect the load unexpectedly beyond the forklift travel path and surrounding loading area. When the forklift turns, sideways force pushes the carton away from the stable fork position. A high load raises the center of gravity, so even a small shift can turn into a fast drop. Lower the load before the turn. Keep the load path clear until the forklift is stopped and stable. Inside a repair garage in Ninh Binh, a damaged Ho truck tire suddenly released stored pressure during servicing, sending force and debris across the workshop. Heavy truck tires remain highly dangerous even after removal from the vehicle because compressed air energy stays trapped inside the assembly. A hidden defect in the casing, rim, bead lock, or wheel structure can rapidly destabilize the system, allowing stored pressure to redirect surrounding tire and wheel components outward with tremendous force. Deep inside a coal mine, a loaded trolley moved toward what appeared to be an elevator landing, but the shaft opening ahead had no platform in place. Underground loading points become high risk when lift platforms are missing or unverified before material movement begins. A moving trolley transfers continuous forward momentum through the rail line, and without a physical elevator deck to stop that motion, the shaft opening becomes an uncontrolled gravity path for equipment. Steel rail carts move with very low rolling resistance, allowing heavy loads to continue forward with minimal force. Once the trolley reaches an unsupported edge, gravity redirects the cart into the open vertical space before normal stopping distance can take effect. An empty shaft entrance can look operational until momentum reaches the edge. Lift position verification, physical gate barriers, and interlocked trolley controls keep underground transport routes controlled. The backyard trimming looked almost finished until the hanging limbs and unstable ladder setup suddenly altered the available support and movement paths above the fence line. Do not rely on unstable ladders or unsupported body positioning while cutting suspended tree limbs. Evaluate branch tension, secure the work area, and use controlled cutting methods before removing overhead material. Inside a workplace corridor, a large industrial fan was being switched off when an electrical fault unexpectedly energized the equipment frame and circuit path. Electrical equipment requires verified grounding, insulation integrity, and isolation capability throughout its service life. Moisture intrusion, damaged wiring, failed insulation, or grounding defects can create unintended energized paths within the equipment. Electrical faults can energize metal frames, switches, or housings when insulation, grounding, or internal components fail. Fault current then travels through the nearest conductive path as energy seeks ground. Electrical faults can remain hidden within energized equipment systems. Defective wiring, grounding failures, and insulation breakdown require isolation and correction before the system returns to service. At the construction yard, a crane lifts the oversized structure onto the trailer when the suspended load suddenly shifts outside the stable balance above the transport lane. Verify crane load limits, rigging stability, and center of gravity balance before lifting oversized structures. Monitor load movement continuously during lifting and trailer positioning because shifting weight can rapidly reduce overall lifting stability. At the roadside delivery stop, stacked metal panels shift outward from the small cargo truck and unstable movement spreads across the unloading area. Secure sheet materials with stable restraints and balanced stacking before unloading side-loaded cargo. Stay completely outside unstable movement areas during transport adjustment and panel handling operations. Tall metal panels stored vertically create strong lateral force against restraints, especially during transport vibration, braking, or uneven weight distribution. As tension changes or one panel shifts outward, the stack's center of gravity can rapidly move beyond the support edge and redirect force through the remaining sheets. One shifting panel can destabilize an entire stack within seconds. Secure the load and stay clear of unstable movement areas. A massive cable reel entered the stairwell as gravity-driven momentum rapidly increased along the descending path. Large rolling loads can gain momentum rapidly on stairways and sloped surfaces. Load control systems, restraint methods, and support structures must be capable of managing the maximum expected movement force before transport begins. A rotating fabric shaft became an active pull-in hazard as material entered the exposed wrap path. Never, ever reach near exposed rotating shafts while equipment is operating. Install guarding, isolate energy sources, and keep all body positioning outside rotating contact areas. Rotating shafts generate continuous wrap force that pulls contacting material into the direction of rotation. Once material enters the rotating surface path, torque and momentum rapidly increase the draw-in force. Rotating machinery can transfer motion instantly through exposed contact paths. Guarding and energy isolation are essential wherever rotating shafts remain accessible. Inside a narrow electronic stockroom, a phone in hand meets smooth tile, tight shelving, and one unstable step. Distraction steals awareness before it steals balance. The second your attention leaves the floor, shelving, and footing, movement control begins shifting away from stable footing and awareness. On a city work lane, a road crew operates beside live traffic as a bus drifts into the exposed work path. Visibility is not protection. Roadside operations become unstable when visibility assumptions replace physical separation. Build physical separation first because traffic rarely corrects human assumptions in time during active roadside construction and lane maintenance operations near active traffic flow. A bus carries massive forward momentum, and its swept path can extend into the road edge during lane changes or tight passing. Dust, glare, narrow spacing, and roadside equipment reduce reaction time fast. Live traffic must be controlled before roadwork starts. Separate the lane, protect the work path, and never rely on visibility alone. Inside an auto detailing bay, a reversing car enters the shop while movement continues beside an uncovered service pit. A spotter watching one hazard can miss another. Never let vehicle awareness blind you to what is directly beneath your own feet. At a freight yard, stacked steel beams suddenly shifted off a flatbed trailer, rapidly redirecting movement across the unloading zone. Unsecured steel bundles on elevated trailers create a severe lateral movement hazard during unloading or restraint release. The moment binding tension changes or load balance shifts, gravity can redirect the entire mass outward. Long steel sections may rapidly slide, rotate, and move together across a wide area with little warning. At the construction site, a mobile crane attempted to hoist a massive concrete form assembly when the suspended load suddenly exceeded the machine's stable lifting balance. Exceeding a crane's lifting capacity can transfer more force into the boom and rigging system than the machine's stabilizing base, and outriggers are designed to resist, reducing stable ground contact during the lift. Cranes rely on counterweight mass and ground contact to oppose leverage created during lifting operations. When suspended load force exceeds the stabilizing force at the base, the crane's center of gravity shifts and the machine can rapidly lose stable positioning. Heavy lifting limits are controlled entirely by balance and leverage. Load charts, lift planning, and stable counterweight calculations are what keep cranes grounded under extreme force. At a container yard, a reversing trailer entered a restricted travel lane while blind zones expanded along the rear movement path. Reversing trailers create extended blind zones and active rear travel paths within container yards. Protected exclusion areas, controlled routing, and verified separation distances must remain established throughout reversing operations. During excavator recovery beside a retaining wall, the suspended machine showed increasing instability as the load moved outside its stable support range. Any suspended load displaying shifting geometry, unexpected rotation, or unstable load behavior indicates reduced lift stability. Load position and support conditions must remain within verified stability limits throughout placement operations. As the excavator was lowered, its center of gravity shifted beyond its stable support area. Once the load moved outside that balance point, gravity accelerated the rotation and the machine could no longer settle in a controlled position. Instability indicates changing load paths and reduced support margins. Restore stable load geometry before continuing any lifting, lowering, or placement activity. At a busy container yard, the trailer sits still in the narrow lane as another heavy vehicle approaches from behind. Stay clear of the space between trailer doors and moving vehicles during cargo access and delivery operations. Use controlled traffic lanes and clear communication to prevent vehicles from entering active unloading paths. Inside the live electrical substation, one cabinet door opens and intense electrical activity rapidly spreads through the corridor area. Isolate and verify zero energy before opening or accessing electrical panels inside energized substations. Use arc flash protection, lockout procedures, and safe approach boundaries around all high-voltage equipment. High-voltage switchgear stores large amounts of electrical energy that can release rapidly if insulation failure, conductive contact, or phase faults occur inside the cabinet. When an electrical arc forms surrounding air heats and expands quickly, creating intense thermal energy and rapidly spreading electrical activity through the confined space. Treat every electrical cabinet as energized until fully isolated and tested. Smoke began emerging from a kitchen appliance as electrical conditions rapidly deteriorated within the equipment. Smoke, abnormal heat, burning odors, discoloration, or unusual electrical behavior indicate loss of normal operating conditions within energized equipment. Electrical systems displaying these conditions require immediate isolation and inspection before continued operation. Inside a factory aisle, an overhead hoist carried a long pipe bundle when load alignment within the lifting system was suddenly lost. Long suspended loads amplify small alignment errors across the entire load path. Any uneven movement, shifting geometry, or loss of alignment should trigger immediate reassessment of lift stability. A long pipe bundle acts like a suspended lever, so small hook movement can create major motion across the full load. Once the support structure loses alignment, momentum spreads through the hoist, frame, and bundle as uncontrolled movement. Stability must be proven before the lift begins. If the setup starts shifting, stop everything. In a loading bay, a suspended steel coil overloads the lifting setup, drops to the floor, and begins uncoiling. As stored energy rapidly releases through the coil path, heavy loads fail in more than one direction. When lifting steel coils, remember, the danger is not only the drop, but the stored energy released after impact. A steel coil carries massive weight, plus stored spring energy from tightly wound metal. When the lifting equipment fails, the coil can release motion in multiple directions as it rolls, rebounds, and uncoils across nearby loading areas and surrounding industrial equipment after sudden contact with the floor surface. Rated rigging must match the load before the coil leaves the ground. Control the lift, control the stored energy, and keep the coil path clear. Inside an office workstation, a relaxed lean turns a rolling chair into a failed support surface. Routine comfort creates overlooked risk. Most preventable falls happen during ordinary moments, when people stop treating everyday equipment like something that can still fail. Behind a parked bus, a sweeping task continues as unsecured cargo on top shifts into the work path. Before working below anything elevated, ask what could fall, not what appears stable. Gravity only needs one unnoticed shift to turn overhead storage into direct impact. A load placed high on a bus has little stability. Once vibration, movement, or poor stacking breaks its balance. When it shifts off the roofline, gravity turns it into rapid downward movement of unsecured material. Wind movement, uneven stacking pressure, nearby vehicle vibration, and unsecured tie-down points can further increase the chance of sudden cargo displacement above nearby access and work areas. Overhead, cargo must be secured before work starts below. Control the load above before anyone works behind the vehicle. Along an unfinished brick wall, movement across a narrow work surface suddenly becomes unstable as footing shifts out of alignment. Unprotected masonry edges create narrow and unstable work surfaces whenever movement, carried materials, or shifting body weight reduce available footing width along the structure. Inside the machining bay, a high-speed rotating assembly suddenly lost structural integrity, rapidly releasing force and material movement across the work area. High RPM industrial equipment stores enormous rotational and pressure energy, where component instability or structural weakness can rapidly redirect mechanical force outside the intended operating zone. As rotating machinery spins at high speed, centrifugal force continuously pushes outward against the material structure. If a component weakens or pressure containment loses integrity, stored rotational energy can rapidly redirect surrounding material and force through the machine area. Rotating systems can release enormous mechanical force within fractions of a second. Protective guarding, pressure monitoring, and controlled operating limits help keep that energy safely contained. During rooftop demolition, repeated hammer impacts altered the structural load path within the supporting surface. Demolition activity continuously changes structural support conditions. Load-bearing sections, support paths, and remaining structural capacity must be identified and maintained throughout material removal operations. At a scaffolded building facade, a boom lift raised a large panel when the material suddenly moved outside its secured support position. Panels elevated from boom lifts require positive restraint, controlled load support, and verified retention systems throughout lifting and positioning operations. A panel lifted at height stores gravitational energy and can shift when friction, balance, or handling angle changes. Once it passes the restraint point, gravity pulls it down, while the boom position redirects the release path. Elevated panels become active moving loads whenever support conditions change. Maintain positive restraint and controlled load paths throughout the lift. Inside a factory loading area, the elevated forklift load suddenly shifts as movement approaches the unstable material stack. Keep workers completely off elevated forklift loads and unsupported material stacks during lifting operations. Use approved access platforms and stable work surfaces instead of riding or balancing on raised materials. A rolling scaffold moves through the narrow alley as the metal frame suddenly enters the overhead electrical clearance area. Dismantle or lower scaffolding before moving it anywhere near energized overhead power lines. Verify clearance distances and isolate utility hazards before relocating tall metal structures through active work areas. Metal scaffolding can rapidly conduct electrical energy once it enters the clearance zone around energized overhead lines. Electrical energy may transfer through the surrounding air even without direct line contact, allowing the scaffold structure to become energized very quickly. Maintain safe clearance distances and lower tall structures before moving them near overhead electrical systems. Inside a cramped workshop, a running lathe created an active entanglement path around the rotating chuck. Exposed rotating chucks generate continuous draw-in hazards around active spindle systems, maintain guarded separation, and keep all materials outside the rotation path until motion has completely stopped. At a cement loading area, the tanker connection shifted and the silo docking system suddenly lost containment during material transfer. Docking systems require stable alignment, secure couplings, and verified seal integrity throughout pressurized material transfer operations. Any shifting connection, unstable hose movement, or loss of alignment indicates reduced containment capability within the transfer system. Pressurized cement flow creates force through the hose and coupling, especially when the connection is misaligned. If the docking setup moves or loses seal, the material releases rapidly as a dense dust plume. Stable docking alignment must be maintained before pressure is introduced into the transfer system. Shifting connections, unstable couplings, or seal movement indicate reduced containment integrity during material transfer. In a wet parking area, a reversing forklift struggles for control while parked cars sit directly in its travel path. The first warning is usually internal. If control feels wrong, stop immediately. Ignoring that instinct often turns unstable movement into uncontrolled vehicle travel. Inside a stockroom aisle, a water hose is being folded when trapped pressure makes it rise and snake through the surrounding aisle area. Flexible lines become dangerous when treated like dead weight. Until pressure is gone, assume the hose can still move faster than you can react. Water trapped inside a hose can shift suddenly and make the line lift, whip, or curl. Loose loops on the floor create an instant movement obstruction during rapid direction changes. Residual pressure, uneven draining, tight bends, and rapid movement can rapidly redirect the hose across walking paths, nearby shelving, and confined work areas during cleanup operations. Drain the hose before handling it. Control the line before it controls the floor. Inside a production line, movement continued beside an active machine frame when the side mechanism suddenly narrowed the available working space around the equipment. Industrial conveyor and press systems create severe pinch hazards wherever moving sections travel alongside fixed structures. When personnel enter narrowing spaces beside active machinery, continuous mechanical movement can rapidly reduce available clearance around the operating path. Inside the warehouse entrance, a forklift traveled forward with its mast raised high until the overhead frame suddenly contacted the upper structure and redirected the machine's movement. Raised forklift masts dramatically increase overhead strike risk when traveling through doorways, low clearance entries, or confined structures where the machine height exceeds the available vertical space. A forklift's elevated mast shifts both height profile and leverage force upward during movement. Once the mast contacts a rigid overhead surface, forward momentum rapidly transfers into the frame, reducing stable machine positioning through the chassis. Overhead clearance hazards can rapidly destabilize routine equipment travel. Lowered mass, controlled travel height, and verified clearance paths help keep moving equipment stable inside confined spaces. Inside a service corridor, a folding lift gate was opened while the gate opening remained within the active movement path, and the panel suddenly returned through its travel range. Folding lift gates require positive mechanical restraint, locking devices, or verified support systems before access openings remain exposed. Any gate panel capable of movement must remain secured against unintended travel. On a high-rise facade, a suspended bracket shifted during placement and moved outside its intended support alignment along the wall face. Facade brackets require controlled lifting points, stable load alignment, and managed load path movement throughout positioning operations. Any rotation, drift, or unintended movement indicates reduced placement stability. A suspended bracket behaves like a pendulum when lifting angles support geometry or load forces change. As the load drifts away from its intended alignment, lateral force and swing movement increase around the placement area. Facade installation depends on stable load alignment and controlled movement paths. Maintain positive load control and verified support alignment throughout bracket placement operations. The angle grinder works on a metal structure and suddenly redirects movement away from the cutting path within seconds. Maintain a stable grip, controlled stance, and correct cutting angle whenever operating an angle grinder. Keep the disc aligned with the material path and avoid awkward positioning that can trigger sudden kickback. A road grader rolls through the work area as movement approaches the machine's front wheel travel path. Keep pedestrians completely separated from the travel path of moving heavy equipment during roadwork operations. Use spotters, exclusion zones, and confirmed operator awareness before crossing near active machinery. Road graders create large blind zones around the front wheels, articulation joints, and turning radius during movement. As the machine steers or changes direction, the wheel path and frame swing can rapidly reduce nearby clearance around surrounding work areas. Heavy equipment blind zones change quickly during machine movement. Separation and visibility control help reduce travel path exposure. Inside an industrial workshop, an exposed rotating shaft keeps spinning as close access enters the rotation path. Never, ever allow close access near an exposed rotating shaft while it is running. Guard the shaft, stop rotation before adjustment, and keep the operating area clear until all motion has fully stopped. Inside a factory bay, a suspended machine section suddenly lost stability as load forces shifted through the lifting and support system. Suspended equipment requires verified load support, balanced positioning, and stable contact points throughout placement operations. Any shifting load geometry or uneven support condition requires immediate reassessment of lift stability. When heavy equipment moves outside its balanced support condition, load forces rapidly redistribute through the crane, rigging, and supporting structure. Sudden changes in load path can exceed the capacity of supporting components. A suspended load remains an active stability hazard until all load forces are fully transferred to a secure support system. Verify support integrity before continuing placement operations. Inside a factory aisle, a forklift movement sends tall metal racks redirecting unstable storage movement through the surrounding aisle area. Moving machines expose weak surroundings. Before driving past storage racks, ask what else could fall if your vehicle makes even minor contact. On a construction floor, an uncovered elevator shaft sits beside the work path as one step meets missing support. Openings disappear fastest when people think they already know the room. Familiar workspaces breed shortcuts, and one distracted movement can redirect travel beyond the protected floor surface. A floor opening removes support instantly when the walking path is not protected. Poor lighting, visual distraction, and unfinished edges make the hazard harder to detect in motion. Loose debris, obstructed sight lines, nearby equipment noise, and repeated movement activity can further reduce awareness of unguarded shaft openings during active construction operations across partially completed floor sections. Every floor opening needs a physical barrier. Mark it, cover it, guard it, or stop the work. Inside a small roadside drink shop, a spinning sugarcane juicer suddenly caught loose fabric and rapidly redirected movement around the rotating mechanism. Rotating shafts, rollers, and exposed drive handles can rapidly convert loose fabric, sleeves, or hair into continuous rotational movement. Once contact begins, the machine's rotational energy can keep pulling material deeper around the moving components. Inside the fabrication line, cutting sparks spread across the work area until heated metal particles suddenly reached a nearby cylinder storage area. Hot work operations create hidden ignition paths where airborne sparks can travel far beyond the cutting zone and rapidly interact with nearby pressurized or flammable containers. Grinding and welding sparks are superheated metal particles carrying enough thermal energy to activate combustible gases, vapors, or residues on contact. Once heat reaches a confined cylinder or container, rising temperature and internal pressure can rapidly increase instability around the storage area. A single spark can travel farther than the visible work area. Hot work isolation, protected storage, and spark containment help prevent secondary heat and ignition hazards. Inside the steel factory, molten metal escaped the furnace containment area and rapidly expanded the thermal hazard zone across the production floor. Molten metal operations require furnace integrity checks, controlled pour zones, heat shielding, and emergency isolation procedures. Even a small containment failure can rapidly release thermal energy and ignite surrounding combustible materials. During trailer loading, a compact loader was lowering a large root log when the attachment system suddenly lost load support capability. Loader arms, couplers, pins, welds, and hydraulic attachments require verified structural integrity before handling oversized or uneven loads. Any deformation, cracking, shifting geometry, or attachment instability indicates reduced load support capacity. A large root log creates uneven weight and high leverage on the loader attachment. When the attachment arms fail, the load path disappears and gravity transfers the full weight directly downward. Mechanical attachment failures can instantly remove the intended load path. Verify attachment integrity, equipment capacity, and load support conditions before lowering oversized material. Long metal sections hang on the overhead power lines until electrical activity suddenly develops through the suspended frame. Maintain verified clearance distances whenever moving conductive materials near overhead electrical lines. Use dedicated spotters and controlled lift paths to keep suspended metal sections out of energized zones. Beside the flatbed trailer, one massive steel cylinder shifts outward and rapidly redirects movement from the stacked load. Secure all-round materials with chock straps and blocking systems before unloading or transport handling. Stay completely out of the roll path around cylindrical loads, even during inspection or load adjustment. Large steel cylinders carry significant rolling force because their curved shape allows movement with very little resistance once rotation begins. If restraints loosen, weight shifts unevenly, or support points fail, the cylinder can rapidly move outside stable positioning under its own momentum. One loose cylinder can quickly become an uncontrolled rolling hazard. Inside a machine shop, uneven rope control altered the suspended machine's load path and stability. Suspended loads require controlled force application, balanced restraint systems, and coordinated load path management. Conflicting force inputs can rapidly destabilize suspended equipment. On a muddy roadside, a tanker suddenly lost parking stability near the unsupported road edge. Heavy vehicles parked on soft ground, sloped surfaces, or unsupported edges require wheel restraint and verified ground support. Stability can rapidly decrease when traction or surface integrity changes. A loaded tanker carries high mass, so even a slow rollback builds momentum quickly. When braking force is lost on uneven or muddy ground, gravity pulls the vehicle backward, and the road edge can no longer support the load. Chock the wheels before the stop becomes unstable. Keep heavy vehicles away from weak road edges. On a city street, a sanitation truck reverses while rear platform movement enters the reversing vehicle path. Movement changes your safest exit. What feels like a normal dismount becomes a blind step once vehicle movement begins behind the platform area. At a warehouse doorway, an inventory count continues in the loading threshold just before the truck begins moving. Thresholds feel stationary until vehicles move. Never let a routine task keep movement positioned inside a space that can become an active travel lane instantly during loading, unloading, or unexpected trailer repositioning operations beside active dock areas. A loading doorway creates a blind transition between stacked cargo, indoor floor space, and vehicle movement outside. Once the truck moves, the threshold becomes an active travel path with little reaction time. Count the boxes only after the truck is secured. Clear the doorway before any vehicle movement starts. On the Metro Line construction site, an excavator rotated while nearby movement remained hidden inside the machine's blind spot. The rear swing radius of rotating excavators becomes a rapidly changing movement zone whenever visibility disappears behind the machine body. Once the upper structure begins turning, nearby movement inside that hidden arc can enter the machine's travel range before the operator regains visual awareness of the area. Beside the heavy trailer axle, a truck tire was being inflated when the pressurized sidewall suddenly released stored air force during servicing. Large industrial tires store enormous compressed air energy, and structural weakness, overinflation, or internal damage can rapidly destabilize the tire assembly during inflation procedures. Compressed air inside heavy vehicle tires creates intense outward pressure against the sidewall and rim assembly. If structural integrity is lost during inflation, stored pressure can rapidly redirect force and surrounding material outward from the tire. Compressed air can release tremendous force without obvious warning signs. Inflation cages, remote air lines, and controlled pressure procedures help keep tire energy safely contained during servicing. Inside a garage bay, a system was energized near an engine compartment when an ignition source reached a flammable atmosphere within the engine area. Engine compartments can contain fuel residue, vapor sources, damaged wiring, and ignition points. Fuel system integrity, electrical condition, and vapor control must be verified before system energization occurs. On a residential driveway, one paving slab was removed from a stacked group when adjacent slabs suddenly shifted after losing lateral support. Leaning slab stacks require controlled separation, stable support conditions, and maintained spacing before individual slabs are removed. Unsupported slab groups can rapidly redistribute load forces when support geometry changes. Stacked slabs rely on adjacent sections for lateral stability. Removing one slab alters the support geometry and can transfer load forces into the remaining stack. The instability began when the stack lost its shared support condition, separate brace, and stabilized slab groups before removing individual sections. A roll of cables is being thrown towards a metal ladder beside the overhead lines as electrical activity suddenly develops around the clearance area. Maintain confirmed clearance distances whenever raising ladders, poles, or conductive tools near overhead power lines. Use non-conductive equipment, spotters, and utility isolation controls before working anywhere near energized lines. Inside the steel fabrication workshop, the forklift carrying oversized pipe sections suddenly shifts outside stable positioning near the machine lane. Secure oversized cylindrical loads and verify balanced fork positioning before transport inside fabrication areas. Keep forklift travel paths clear of edges, tight turns, and uneven surfaces when moving heavy round materials. Large pipe sections can rapidly change a forklift's center of gravity because cylindrical loads move and roll more easily than flat materials during transport. As the forklift turns or crosses uneven ground, changing load momentum can redirect force beyond the machine's stable support area and reduce overall balance. Oversized round loads can rapidly reduce forklift stability. In an industrial yard, open flame reached a gas tank containing residual flammable vapor under pressure. Gas containers can retain flammable vapor long after visible fuel has been removed. Residual vapor, trapped pressure, and combustible atmospheres may remain inside the vessel until verified empty, vented, cleaned, and tested. In a food production room, the dough knife remained capable of cycling while the exposed cutter path stayed accessible. Never ever allow access to a dough knife path while stored energy, drive power, or automatic cycling capability remains present. Full, shutdown, energy isolation, lockout protection, and verified zero energy status are required before the cutter path remains exposed. A dough knife moves through a fixed cutting stroke using stored mechanical force. When cycling occurs, the blade path closes rapidly through the operating envelope until the motion sequence is complete. Active cutter systems remain hazardous while cycling capability exists. Verify zero energy status and complete motion isolation before the cutter path remains accessible. At a tire service bay, an unrestrained tire assembly turns compressed air into a rapid pressure release. Distance is your best protection from stored pressure. If inflation must happen, your body should never be the closest object to the failure path. At a small construction trench, a loaded wheelbarrow rolls onto a narrow plank bridge with no margin for error. Improvised shortcuts fail under real weight. If the path was not built for the load, assume the load will eventually expose that mistake. A loaded wheelbarrow concentrates weight through one front wheel, creating high pressure on a small contact point. On a narrow plank, any side shift can turn the load into a lever and remove stable support. Uneven footing, soft ground, wet surfaces, and sudden steering corrections can rapidly destabilize narrow crossings during material transport operations. A trench crossing must be built, not improvised. Secure the path before the load moves. Along a quiet fishing bank, a long carbon rod suddenly arced upward near overhead high-voltage lines and triggered intense electrical activity overhead. Fishing poles, ladders, cranes, and other long conductive objects can unintentionally bridge electrical gaps beneath transmission lines. Once contact or close electrical arcing occurs, high voltage energy can rapidly travel through the object and energize the surrounding area with tremendous force. At a residential construction entrance, a long metal support suddenly shifted free above the gate and redirected downward into the access area below. Temporary supports and unsecured beams can store unstable gravitational force for long periods before rapidly losing stable positioning. The moment a structure shifts, suspended timber can pivot, slide, or redirect movement into nearby walkways and entry zones. Large wooden beams carry significant downward load and rotational leverage, especially when partially braced or improperly secured. Once support balance changes, gravity rapidly accelerates the beam and redirects heavy structural movement through the surrounding area. Construction access points can become unstable movement zones when temporary structures remain unsupported or improperly secured. Load securing, exclusion areas, and structural inspection are critical whenever heavy materials are positioned overhead near active work routes. On a snow-covered driveway, accumulated roof snow suddenly released and entered the ground-level accumulation area below. Roof snowpacks store significant weight that can release when temperature, surface conditions, or load distribution changes. Ground-level areas within potential release paths require protection until overhead accumulation is removed or stabilized. During floor tile installation, a large tile created an unstable leverage condition as the unsupported edge extended beyond the primary support point. Large format tiles require controlled support, balanced lifting geometry, and maintained load control throughout positioning and placement. Unsupported edges and uneven load distribution can rapidly reduce stability. Large tiles generate leverage because much of their weight remains distributed away from the primary support area. As the unsupported span increases, the load's center of gravity shifts farther from the controlled support point. Large panels become unstable when leverage exceeds available support. Maintain balanced support and controlled load geometry throughout placement operations. At a wastewater treatment reservoir, the maintenance platform suddenly shifts upward as pressure and trapped gases rapidly spread beneath the structure. Gas test and isolate enclosed waste reservoirs before welding, cutting, or performing any ignition-producing maintenance. Use continuous atmospheric monitoring and ventilation controls around confined wastewater systems where trapped gases may accumulate. Inside the electrical control room, unstable electrical activity rapidly spreads from the energized equipment through the narrow corridor. De-energize and verify isolation before opening or working inside electrical switchgear and energized panels. Use arc flash boundaries, lockout procedures, and rated PPE before any access to live electrical equipment. An electrical arc can form when current transfers through air between energized conductors or damaged components inside the equipment. The fault rapidly releases thermal energy and expanding gases through the confined control room space. Isolation and arc flash protection must come before panel access. On a construction platform, concrete braking continued near an unsupported edge as structural support rapidly decreased. Demolition activities can alter load paths and support conditions as material removal progresses. Cracking, vibration, and unsupported edges indicate reduced structural capacity. At a high-rise fire scene, heavy smoke rolled from the upper floors as heat exposure rapidly reduced structural load-bearing capacity. Never, ever consider a multi-floor fire-exposed structure stable once heat has affected primary load-bearing systems. Collapse zones, falling debris paths, and structural instability boundaries must expand as fire exposure spreads through connected structural elements. Fire weakens steel, concrete connections, and floor systems by reducing their load-carrying strength. As heat spreads through stacked floors, gravity can turn local failure into a full vertical collapse. Fire exposure can rapidly alter structural load paths within high-rise buildings. Collapse zones, falling debris areas, and structural stability boundaries must expand whenever load-bearing capacity becomes uncertain. At a high-rise construction site, a lifted panel catches wind and turns into rapid airborne movement through the lift path. Wind changes the rules instantly. Once a large panel leaves the ground, it can stop behaving like material and start behaving like a sail. Inside a laundry workroom, loose clothing enters a rotating machine path and turns fabric into a pull-in hazard. Entanglement begins with one unnoticed loose end. Before approaching rotating equipment, check what your clothing can do under motion, not just what your hands intend to do. A rotating drum creates continuous torque, and loose fabric can wrap tighter with every turn. Once the cloth catches, the machine energy transfers into rapid rotational movement. Loose sleeves, dangling garments, poor positioning, and delayed shutdown response can quickly increase rotational pull forces around active rotating laundry equipment during routine cleaning operations. Loose clothing and rotating equipment must stay separated. Secure the garment, guard the machine, and stop power before clearing fabric. Inside the industrial bay, a forklift contacted a suspended load, rapidly transferring force into the overhead beam and destabilizing the lifting assembly. Suspended loads can rapidly lose stable positioning when contacted by moving equipment because even a brief impact may redirect load tension, overload lifting components, and reduce stability throughout the suspended system. Outside the building entrance, a heavily overloaded trailer shifted against the tractor's balance until the entire vehicle redirected sideways near the staircase area. Excessive rear load weight can rapidly reduce steering stability and directional control, especially during turning or uneven movement, where trailer momentum begins influencing the towing vehicle's travel path. A heavily loaded trailer stores large amounts of rolling momentum and lateral force. Once load weight exceeds the tractor's stabilizing grip and steering capability, the trailer can begin oscillating side to side and redirecting vehicle movement outward. Overloaded towing systems can become unstable before movement changes are fully visible. Balanced load distribution, controlled towing weight, and protected pedestrian spacing help keep trailer momentum stable during transport. Inside the scrapyard workshop, a welding arc struck near the gas tank area, allowing ignition to reach trapped flammable vapor inside the container. Fuel tanks can retain highly flammable vapor even when appearing empty or inactive. Welding, grinding, or striking an arc near unverified tanks can ignite flammable vapor atmospheres inside confined spaces. During roadside demolition, an excavator operating on unstable ground suddenly shifted position, altering the planned force path through the structure. Demolition equipment requires verified ground support, stable positioning, and controlled force application throughout structural removal. Changes in ground bearing capacity, machine alignment, or pull direction can rapidly alter structural load paths. Demolition depends on controlled force and predictable load paths. When the excavator shifts on weak ground, the pulling angle changes, transferring force into the structure unevenly and allowing the building to fail outside the planned sequence. Demolition stability depends on both structural behavior and machine support conditions. Maintain stable ground conditions and controlled force paths throughout the demolition sequence. Inside the warehouse loading lane, the reversing flatbed truck moves deeper into the blind rear area as bicycle traffic approaches the narrow lane behind the trailer. Use spotters, exclusion zones, and controlled reversing procedures wherever heavy vehicles operate near cyclists or pedestrians. Keep bicycle and pedestrian routes separated from truck backing lanes inside loading and transport areas. At the crowded warehouse loading platform, one heavy carton shifts outward from the stack as stability changes along the narrow elevated edge. Secure stacked materials and maintain stable footing before handling heavy loads near elevated platform edges. Use guarded fall protection and controlled lifting methods whenever working around narrow loading platforms. Removing a heavy carton from a stacked load can rapidly shift the balance point of both the material stack and the surrounding work position. On narrow, elevated platforms, even small changes in weight distribution can reduce overall footing stability and redirect force toward the platform edge. Elevated platforms can rapidly increase material handling instability. Inside a crowded textile factory, movement approaches the running roller assembly as the energized feed system rapidly redirects material through the machine path. Keep clear of exposed rollers, spindles, and textile feed systems while machinery remains energized and moving. Use guards, lockout procedures, and safe standoff distance before reaching near rotating equipment. Beside a roadside construction, a moving truck breaks past the perimeter barrier and rapidly enters the active work zone. Protect roadside work areas with reinforced barriers, buffer distance, and clear escape paths beside active traffic lanes. Keep workers separated from moving vehicle routes wherever trucks operate near excavation or construction zones. Heavy trucks carry significant forward momentum that temporary fencing and lightweight perimeter barriers may not fully contain during sudden roadway deviation. If a vehicle leaves its lane, transferred force can rapidly redirect barriers, debris, equipment, or the vehicle itself into nearby excavation areas. Strong separation and protected positioning are critical beside active roadways. As an excavator rolls onto the ship, the vessel shifts under the changing weight, and the deck rapidly moves outside stable positioning. Verify vessel load limits, ballast stability, and deck weight distribution before loading heavy equipment onto ships or barges. Control equipment positioning and loading sequence carefully to reduce rapid balance changes during transfer operations. Inside a workshop, a tall metal panel was pulled across the floor when the load suddenly moved outside its stable balance range. Tall panels contain elevated centers of gravity that can shift rapidly during movement. Load stability must be maintained throughout transport and positioning operations. On a steep tiled roof, an unsecured ladder suddenly lost lateral stability on the sloped surface. Never ever use a loose ladder as roof support on a sloped tile surface. The ladder must be secured at the top and base, tied off, and paired with proper fall prevention before any roof movement begins. Roof tiles offer low friction, especially under angled load. Once the ladder shifts sideways, gravity pulls it down the slope and removes the stable footing path instantly. Secure the ladder before roof access begins. Sloped tile surfaces provide limited lateral stability for unsecured ladders. While unloading equipment from the back of a truck, load forces shifted unevenly, and the suspended weight moved outside its stable balance range. Equipment unloading can rapidly alter load distribution as material is removed. Any uneven weight transfer, shifting support condition, or changing center of gravity requires reassessment of load stability before unloading continues. On roadside scaffolding, an improvised form board flexes under shifting weight and turns the work platform unstable. Improvised platforms fail when real load movement tests them. If a surface was not built for elevated movement, assume the next weight shift may expose the instability. High above a construction site, a suspended platform suddenly shifts and stable footing disappears in seconds. At height, instability feels small until gravity magnifies it. Verify every connection before stepping on because once footing shifts, stable movement options disappear almost instantly. Suspended platforms rely on balanced load distribution and stable center of gravity. Sudden shifting force, uneven weight transfer, or unsecured movement can rapidly destabilize the platform and remove stable support. Wind pressure, loose anchor points, surface vibration, or sudden movement changes can further amplify sway and destabilization during elevated construction operations. Height exposure leaves no margin for unstable movement. Secure the platform, secure the connection, and secure the footing before every task. Inside the equipment yard, a forklift mast suddenly lowered unexpectedly, while nearby movement remained close to the front carriage area. Forklift masts carry massive suspended mechanical weight and hydraulic instability. Lifting component failure or uncontrolled lowering can rapidly reduce safe clearance along the vertical carriage path. Inside a roadside repair area, a pressurized air compressor suddenly lost containment beside a parked tractor, rapidly spreading force and debris across the workshop. Compressed air systems store enormous pressure energy even while appearing completely still. When tanks, fittings, or weakened pressure vessels fail, the sudden pressure release can rapidly redirect metal components and force throughout the surrounding work area. Air compressors store energy by forcing high-pressure air into sealed steel chambers. If corrosion, overpressure, structural fatigue, or faulty valves weaken the vessel, compressed air can rapidly expand outward the moment containment integrity is lost. Pressurized equipment can become a severe stored energy hazard long before visible warning signs appear. Pressure inspections, relief valves, and safe distancing around compressed air systems help reduce large-scale pressure release events inside workshops. During backyard platform access, an improvised ladder arrangement suddenly lost stability as support conditions shifted beneath the access system. Access systems require rated ladders, stable base support, secured positioning, and verified contact points throughout use. Improvised ladder arrangements can rapidly lose stability when support geometry changes. While unloading a large load with a forklift, the elevated load suddenly moved beyond its stable support position beside the transfer area. Never attempt to stop a shifting load by hand during forklift operations. Once a suspended load loses balance, its momentum and weight can rapidly expand the affected load movement area around the transfer zone. As the load passed its center of gravity, gravitational force accelerated the sideways rotation. Load momentum increased rapidly beyond the capability of manual intervention. Unstable loads must be cleared, not physically resisted, during forklift unloading. Exclusion zones and controlled positioning prevent exposure to sudden load shift energy. At a crowded construction site, a suspended load suddenly shifts overhead and rapidly redirects movement through the active work area. Keep workers completely out of active lifting and overhead material zones during construction operations. Use barricades, debris control, and exclusion areas beneath all elevated work and suspended loads. Materials positioned at height can shift from vibration, unstable stacking, failed restraints, or movement during lifting operations. Once support changes, gravity rapidly increases downward movement and force through the surrounding work area. Overhead, work creates rapidly changing hazards below. Secure the load and keep work areas clear during lifting operations. At a construction site, unstable positioning remains beside the dump truck when the vehicle suddenly begins moving forward. Do not move vehicles until all workers are fully inside, off the truck, and clear of the access area. Use direct communication and movement confirmation before any vehicle begins rolling. An outdoor electrical cabinet suddenly develops intense electrical activity across the panel face. De-energize and verify isolation before opening or handling electrical cabinets and energized equipment. Use lockout procedures and proper arc flash protection during all electrical maintenance and inspection work. Electrical arcs can form when current transfers between energized components inside the cabinet. Moisture, damaged insulation, conductive tools, or accidental contact can rapidly create a fault path within energized electrical equipment. Electrical arc events can release dangerous energy within milliseconds. In a roadside unloading area, a forklift lifts a load from a truck. Then unstable ground shifts under the machine and it tilts sideways. Don't lift heavy or oversized loads from soft, uneven, or unsupported ground. Verify the surface can hold the forklift, the load, and the movement before raising the mast. A forklift needs stable ground to keep its weight and load inside the stability triangle. When the ground settles or tilts, the center of gravity shifts sideways, pushing the machine past its balance limit. Stable ground first, load movement second. If the surface shifts, the lift is already unsafe. The crane applies force against the seated round load until the heavy section suddenly redirects movement across the platform edge. Keep workers completely clear of seated or jammed loads during crane pulling and repositioning operations. Use controlled rigging and exclusion zones to prevent sudden load release from driving into nearby work areas. The motor grader rolls along the roadside as movement enters the limited visibility area beside the front wheel path. Stay completely out of the blind side and travel path of moving road equipment during grading operations. Use spotters, exclusion zones, and confirmed visual contact before approaching active machinery near roadside work areas. Motor graders create large blind zones around the front articulation point, blade assembly, and wheel path during movement and turning. As the machine steers or shifts direction, the articulated frame and rolling tires can rapidly reduce nearby clearance around the equipment. Separation and visibility control help reduce machine path exposure. Inside a machine shop, a loose machine component suddenly lost support above the floor-level access area. Unsecured machine components can lose stability when vibration, load transfer, or support conditions change. All components should remain positively secured throughout maintenance and adjustment activities. At an air show flight path, two EA-18G Growlers rapidly reduced separation distance as their maneuver paths converged. Never, ever allow demonstration aircraft to enter crossing paths without strict altitude, timing, and spacing control. Airshow maneuvers need verified separation, clear radio calls, and immediate abort authority when alignment begins to close. Briefed escape headings, hard decks, and display line limits must remain active throughout the sequence, not only during setup. At jet speed, small timing differences create extremely high closure rates. As maneuver paths converge, available separation distance decreases far faster than normal flight path corrections can compensate. At jet speeds, visual judgment alone cannot restore spacing once closure accelerates. Airshow precision depends on separation. When timing breaks, abort before the paths cross. During a live crocodile demonstration, one sudden movement inside the enclosure instantly changes the entire environment. Inside an animal enclosure, your biggest mistake is forgetting whose environment it is. One sudden movement can erase your reaction time before awareness can respond to the movement change. At a garbage loading pit, one stuck load inside a large rolling bin suddenly turns routine disposal into uncontrolled movement. When a stuck load resists, your instinct is often to pull harder. That instinct becomes dangerous when shifting weight can suddenly pull back harder than you can resist. When material remains stuck inside a tilted container, the center of gravity can suddenly shift past the wheelbase. Once the bin rotates forward, its weight and momentum create a rapid pulling force that can rapidly overcome stable footing and movement control. Slippery surfaces, uneven loading, rolling wheels, and sudden material release can quickly accelerate uncontrolled movement around confined waste handling areas and active disposal equipment during routine material handling operations. Heavy containers become unpredictable the moment balance shifts past the tipping point. Stabilize the load first. Never fight gravity by hand. Inside the fabrication area, a large plank suddenly redirected out from the machine at high speed, rapidly crossing the active work path. Material processing equipment can rapidly redirect boards, panels, or planks whenever binding, kickback movement, or uneven feed pressure suddenly releases stored mechanical tension inside the machine. Inside a cotton workshop in Jiangxi, a massive quilt processing press suddenly lowered mid-cycle, while nearby movement remained beneath the active assembly. Large industrial presses and lifting frames become severe suspended weight hazards whenever mechanical locks, hydraulic systems, or support components lose stable control unexpectedly. Any positioning beneath an active machine section places movement directly inside the vertical travel range of the equipment. Cotton-kneading machines rely on synchronized lifting systems to raise and lower heavy compression platforms. If structural support, hydraulic pressure, or control mechanisms malfunction, gravitational load can rapidly redirect the machine assembly downward through the operating area. Suspended machine sections can rapidly destabilize active production areas when overhead systems lose stable control. Safe clearance areas, emergency lock systems, and strict maintenance inspections help keep heavy industrial equipment operating within controlled movement limits. At a tire service area, an open flame was introduced near a large tire assembly, and an ignition source reached combustible material around the bead area. Tire servicing requires manufacturer-approved inflation and bead seating methods. Ignition sources, excessive heat, combustible residue, and uncontrolled pressure conditions must remain isolated from the tire assembly throughout servicing operations. At a textile winding machine, the roll remained energized, while an exposed rotating draw-in path stayed accessible beside the winding section. Rotating winding systems require complete drive isolation and guarded access whenever alignment points, fabric paths, or machine sections remain exposed. Active roll surfaces create continuous draw-in hazards while rotation remains present. A circular roll generates continuous surface traction. Once fabric, thread, wrapping material, or other flexible material enters the rotating contact path, rotational force continues increasing tension around the cylinder. Rotating winding systems maintain continuous draw-in force while energized. Drive isolation and guarded access are required before exposed machine sections remain accessible. Inside a workshop, the skid steer lift arms suddenly shift through the machine path as the control system activates unexpectedly. Lock out skid steer hydraulic controls and engage lift arm supports before entering any area near raised loader arms. Keep clear of the lift arm movement path whenever the machine remains energized or capable of hydraulic movement. A roadside power cabinet suddenly develops intense electrical activity that rapidly spreads across the panel area near the sidewalk. Isolate and verify zero energy before opening or working inside electrical power cabinets. Use arc flash assessment, insulated PPE, and protected boundaries around energized electrical equipment. Electrical arcs can form when current transfers between energized conductors, grounded surfaces, or damaged components inside the cabinet. The fault rapidly releases thermal energy and expanding gases outward from the electrical enclosure. Isolate, test, and protect before opening electrical equipment. On a forest road, an unmarked tow rope stretches across traffic, and a passing vehicle enters the tension line. Tow lines crossing active traffic routes create low visibility tension hazards across the travel path. Recovery operations require route isolation, high visibility marking, controlled traffic separation, and protected boundaries wherever tensioned lines intersect vehicle travel routes. During maintenance, a rotating machine component remained live, unguarded, and energized, while an exposed pull-in path stayed accessible. Never ever allow exposed rotating components to remain energized while guarding is removed or pull-in paths remain accessible. Power isolation, lockout protection, guarding systems, and verified zero energy status are required before rotating assemblies become exposed. Shut down the drive, secure stored energy, test for movement, and keep tools, clothing, gloves, and loose material outside the rotation path until guarding is fully restored. A rotating drum or shaft generates continuous draw-in force at the contact surface. Torque, rotational momentum, and surface friction transfer motion through any material entering the rotating path, increasing wrap force as rotation continues. Even slow rotation can create strong grip once contact begins, because the turning surface keeps pulling material around the drum instead of releasing it. Maintenance starts with lockout. No live rotation belongs near open access. Inside a drilling rig floor, a sudden equipment failure releases pressure and rapid metal movement through the surrounding rig area. Stored pressure gives no second warning. If energized equipment can move, assume it can move toward you and step out of its direct release path first. Inside a busy steel fabrication shop, one shortcut over an active machine opening suddenly redirected movement beyond the protected walking surface. Shortcuts feel efficient until they remove your safety margin. Saving seconds is never worth trusting your footing above an energized opening. Industrial transfer tables and conveyor pits create unstable walking surfaces with hidden openings and moving pinch paths. When footing shifts near rotating or energized equipment, body momentum and gravity can rapidly redirect movement into the machine travel area. Poor visibility, metal debris, vibration, narrow walkways, and distraction from nearby equipment movement can further reduce stable footing and movement awareness around exposed industrial openings. Shortcuts around heavy equipment remove the safety margin instantly. Safe access routes and isolation procedures exist because machines never stop reacting to movement. At a roadside tire workshop in Russia, a mounted truck tire suddenly released stored pressure beside the repair area, rapidly spreading force across the yard. Heavy vehicle tires can store extremely high compressed air energy, even while sitting motionless during servicing. When the casing, bead, rim, or internal structure loses integrity, released pressure can rapidly redirect surrounding parts and debris outward from the tire assembly. In a snow-covered courtyard, a ladder resting on icy ground suddenly slid out of stable alignment during upward movement. winter surfaces quietly reduce traction beneath ladders, turning every upward movement into unstable leverage. Once ladder feet lose grip, gravity and body weight can rapidly increase slide movement beyond stable positioning. Ladders rely on friction between their base and the ground to remain stable. Ice drastically reduces that friction, and as climbing height increases, shifting center of mass adds sideways force that can redirect the ladder base outward. Cold weather can rapidly reduce the stability of ordinary access equipment. Before climbing, ladder feet, surface grip, angle stability, and anchoring conditions must all be secured against unwanted movement. At a construction debris truck, a hinged gate suddenly lost support stability while heavy material loading altered force distribution across the truck bed. Hinged truck gates require positive retention, mechanical support, and verified latch integrity throughout loading operations. Gate systems must remain incapable of swinging, shifting, or changing position while load forces are being applied nearby. During elevated metal cutting, a partially supported section suddenly entered an uncontrolled swing path after the remaining attachment point was removed. Cut sections containing stored tension leverage or suspended weight require controlled support and managed movement paths before separation occurs. Structural supports and adjacent systems must remain outside the expected swing radius. A large metal piece can store tension, weight, and leverage while still partly attached. Once the cut frees it, gravity and stored stress can rotate the section back toward nearby structures with sudden force. Cutting operations instantly alter load paths and support conditions, maintain controlled support, and verified movement paths before final separation occurs. An excavator climbs the narrow hillside road, using the bucket for support when the machine suddenly shifts sideways near the edge. Avoid using excavator arms for stabilization while traveling on steep slopes or unstable roadside shoulders. Assess ground stability and plan safe travel paths before moving heavy equipment across narrow hillside terrain. During dump truck maintenance, unstable movement suddenly develops beneath the raised truck body as the elevated bed shifts toward the service area. Use mechanical body props and secondary locking supports before working beneath any raised dump bed. Never rely on hydraulic pressure alone to hold elevated equipment during maintenance or inspection work. Dump truck beds rely on hydraulic cylinders to remain elevated, but holding pressure can change suddenly from leaks, valve failure, vibration, or unintended control movement. Without mechanical support installed, the weight of the raised body can rapidly transfer downward once hydraulic holding force is reduced. Hydraulic pressure alone is not a reliable support system. At a workshop entrance, a grinder contacted a sealed drum containing residual flammable vapor. Used drums can retain flammable residue, combustible vapor, and trapped pressure long after visible contents have been removed. Containers require cleaning, venting, testing, and atmosphere verification before cutting, grinding, welding, or other ignition-producing activities occur. Seconds after takeoff, the left engine and pylon separated from the MD-11F as the aircraft's primary load path was disrupted during climb. Never, ever treat engine mounts, pylons, or load-bearing aircraft structures as minor inspection items. Fatigue cracks, vibration history, and attachment points must be verified before flight loads are applied. Even small structural irregularities can silently expand across repeated flight cycles until the mounting system can no longer distribute takeoff stress safely. During takeoff, thrust, lift, vibration, and acceleration place extreme force through the engine pylon. If fatigue cracking weakens that mount, the engine load path can fail faster than the aircraft can recover. Once separation begins, asymmetric force rapidly destabilizes the wing structure and alters aerodynamic balance during the climb. Structural fatigue can remain hidden until flight loads stress critical attachment systems. Load-bearing structures require continuous inspection and verification throughout service life. Inside a running rolling mill, an active machine line suddenly releases sparks and intense heat through the operating area. If the machine is still alive, the danger is still active. Never let visual stillness fool you into believing stored energy or residual motion has disappeared. At a loading bay beside a flatbed truck, a forklift turned with an elevated load, and the suspended weight suddenly shifted across the travel path. Raised loads distort judgment as much as balance. What feels like enough clearance can vanish instantly once the machine changes direction. Elevated forklift loads raise the machine's center of gravity and reduce stability during turning. Sudden directional change, uneven load balance, or momentum transfer can cause suspended material to shift, slide, or redirect unexpectedly. Sloped pavement, excessive turning speed, unstable pallets, and limited side clearance can rapidly increase lateral force and unpredictability around active loading zones with nearby access paths and parked transport equipment. Raised loads and turning forces create fast-changing hazard paths. Low travel height, controlled movement, and clear separation zones prevent sudden load shifts from entering active areas. Beneath a damaged exterior structure, a weakened wall section suddenly shifts downward without visible warning. Weakened structural supports can store hidden instability until movement, vibration, or shifting weight rapidly redirects structural force through the damaged area. When materials lose load-bearing stability, surrounding movement zones can change faster than normal reaction time allows. A long metal pole was lifted beside a building facade, and the moment it entered the overhead power line clearance area, sudden electrical arcing appeared across the scene. High-voltage electricity does not require direct physical contact to energize conductive objects. Long metal tools can rapidly become electrical pathways whenever they enter unsafe clearance distances around overhead lines. The extended pole bridged the electrical gap near the energized cable, allowing current to travel through the conductive material. The resulting electrical arc generated rapid heat, light, and energy discharge around the contact area. Overhead power lines must always be treated as protected exclusion areas during exterior cleaning or maintenance work. Before raising ladders, poles, pipes, or tools, workers should identify nearby energized lines and maintain safe clearance distances at all times. Beside an open metal barrel, extinguisher discharge disturbed the burning material and rapidly altered the fire behavior within the container. Open container fires can react differently depending on fuel type, container geometry, burning material, and extinguishing method. Extinguishing agents must remain compatible with the fuel source and fire conditions present. Beside the garbage truck's active collection area, a passing flatbed suddenly squeezed through the narrow roadside gap, collapsing the safe clearance space within seconds. Roadside collection zones create restricted clearance hazards whenever passing vehicles enter narrow side spacing areas. Service vehicles, blind zones, and limited roadway width require traffic buffering, protected separation areas, and controlled positioning around active travel paths. The garbage truck reduced the available roadway width, compressing the passing vehicle's travel path. As the flatbed moved through the narrowed clearance space, lateral spacing rapidly disappeared near the compactor area. Collection routes create high-risk roadside clearance hazards during active operations. Maintain protected work zones and safe separation from passing traffic at all times. Inside an industrial bay, a suspended crane load began swinging as the load path expanded beyond its intended travel line. Suspended loads can rapidly expand their sweep path during lifting, repositioning, and load transfer operations. Exclusion boundaries must account for both the intended load position and the maximum potential swing radius created by momentum, load geometry, and crane movement. At a roadside electrical fire, water entered the energized clearance path surrounding the electrical pole system. Never, ever apply water to energized electrical equipment until verified isolation has removed electrical energy from the system. Electrical fires require controlled isolation, protected boundaries, and suppression methods specifically rated for energized electrical conditions. Keep hoses outside the energized area. Maintain distance from runoff, and coordinate with utility crews before any suppression line, access route, or equipment repositioning is allowed near the pole system. Water can create conductive paths around energized electrical equipment, especially when applied as a continuous stream. When electrical energy reaches the water path, current can transfer through the conductive medium and bridge gaps between energized components and surrounding surfaces. Moisture, ionized air, and conductive contaminants can further increase electrical path continuity. Electrical fire suppression depends on verified energy isolation and appropriate suppression methods. Energized equipment, conductive pathways, and electrical continuity must be controlled before suppression activities proceed. Inside a garage, a ladder access system suddenly lost stability when one support point moved outside its intended contact position. Ladder systems require continuous stability at the base, support surface, and upper contact points. Any change in support geometry, contact condition, or ladder position can rapidly reduce overall stability. Beside a fire truck, a pressurized hose line suddenly released stored pressure energy near the coupling assembly. Charged hose systems require verified coupling integrity, pressure control, and secure line configuration before pressurized flow is introduced. A charged hose stores energy within the pressurized water column and hose structure. Sudden pressure release rapidly transfers force through the line, coupling, and nozzle assembly. Water pressure is stored energy. Secure the line, control the nozzle, and release pressure gradually. Inside a vehicle workshop, a suspended car suddenly dropped from the lift as activity continued beneath the elevated load. A parked vehicle feels harmless until it's airborne. Once lifted, trust only verified supports, never the appearance of stability beneath elevated lifting systems and maintenance areas. Inside a loading dock trailer, a forklift entered to load materials when the trailer suddenly rolled away from the dock, opening a gap behind it. Never, ever enter a trailer until the trailer is fully secured against movement, because even a small rollaway can turn the dock transition into an open floor path. When the trailer moved away from the dock, the bridge between the dock and trailer was broken, leaving an unsupported gap at the transition point. The forklift's weight, momentum, and rearward travel path can quickly overwhelm stability once the trailer floor and dock edge are no longer aligned. Trailer movement creates sudden floor opening exposure at the dock. Wheel restraints, dock locks, chocks, and verified trailer securement must come before loading begins. During ATV unloading from a pickup bed, one ramp suddenly moved outside its stable support position and altered the unloading geometry. Vehicle loading ramps require positive attachment, equal support conditions, verified load capacity, and stable ground contact throughout unloading operations. Inside a moving truck cab, the vehicle entered a restricted toll lane approach while visibility conditions and lane constraints rapidly reduced available travel margins. Heavy vehicles require controlled lane alignment, visibility management, and uninterrupted vehicle guidance when approaching toll plazas, barriers, and restricted width travel routes. A loaded truck needs more distance to react, steer, and stop than a smaller vehicle. Even a short distraction can delay lane correction, braking, and hazard recognition long enough for the vehicle path to change. Distraction removes reaction time before the hazard is even seen. Park first, use the phone later, and keep the driving task fully controlled. A scissor lift moves across loose planks when the elevated platform suddenly shifts outside stable positioning across the site. Operate scissor lifts only on stable, fully supported surfaces designed to handle the machine's weight and movement. Avoid loose boards and temporary bridging paths. A warehouse forklift moves through the wet yard when the tall produce stack suddenly shifts forward beyond stable positioning on the forks. Secure oversized pallet loads and maintain balanced weight distribution before forklift transport operations. Keep loads low, stable, and within clear visibility while traveling across wet or uneven warehouse surfaces. Tall pallet stacks raise the forklift's center of gravity and reduce stability during movement, braking, or turning. As the forklift travels across uneven or slippery ground, shifting momentum transfers force forward through the stacked produce and weakens pallet balance. Tall, unstable loads can rapidly lose stability during forklift movement. At a loading area, a loose equipment component suddenly lost support above the overhead access path. Overhead equipment requires positive retention, verified fastening integrity, and continuous inspection of mounted components. Vibration, movement, wear, and changing load conditions can reduce support integrity and alter overhead load paths. Inside a factory bay, hot work begins on a large metal tank when trapped flammable vapor reaches an ignition source within the vessel. Never, ever cut, weld, or grind on a tank until it is emptied, cleaned, vented, tested, and inserted. Any closed vessel must be treated as a pressure and vapor hazard before ignition sources are introduced. Flammable residue can continue releasing vapor inside a tank long after visible liquid is removed. Heat or sparks can ignite the confined vapor atmosphere, rapidly increasing pressure within the vessel. Routine maintenance pressure often convinces crews that a tank is safe once visible liquid is gone, but invisible vapor can still remain trapped along seams, residue layers, and internal surfaces. Without atmospheric testing and controlled ventilation, even a small spark can rapidly transform confined pressure into an uncontrolled blast event. A closed tank can hide explosive vapor, test, vent, and inert before hot work starts. At a loading dock trailer, a large cabinet suddenly shifted forward beyond stable support moments. After the securing lock was removed from the upright load, restraints often hide imbalance. Before removing the final support, ask what unseen force has been relying on it to remain in a stable position during storage, transport, and unloading operations around elevated trailer surfaces. Inside a press shop, a suspended stamping die suddenly redirected sideways with rapid momentum after the overhead crane snagged the massive load during movement. Suspended loads do not only fall, they swing. Stay out of side impact zones because redirected momentum can reach you faster than gravity alone during sudden directional movement changes. Large stamping dies carry enormous momentum and shifting center of gravity forces during crane transport. If a load catches on surrounding equipment or snags during motion, stored kinetic energy can instantly redirect the die into rapid swing and directional movement across nearby operating areas. Suspended tooling can change direction without warning. Clear lift paths, controlled crane travel, and safe positioning keep access areas outside the load's swing path during active industrial lifting operations. During repairs on a truck's upper railing, the metal frame suddenly released and swung downward across the work area. Suspended rails and hinged truck frames can convert stored tension into rapid rotational movement when restraints slip or disengage. Once movement enters the swing path, even a small release point can generate powerful downward momentum through the surrounding work zone. At a construction entrance, movement near a cement truck shifted into the driver's blind zone within seconds. Heavy vehicles create major visibility gaps directly in front of the cab and alongside turning paths. When pedestrians enter these hidden areas, operators may continue moving without realizing nearby movement remains inside the vehicle's active travel zone. The truck's elevated cab and forward structure reduced the driver's line of sight near the front wheel area. As the vehicle advanced, nearby movement remained hidden inside the blind spot, while forward momentum reduced available stopping distance. Blind spots around heavy construction vehicles must always be treated as restricted movement areas during active operations. Pedestrian access and vehicle travel paths should be separated with spotters, barriers, and clear communication before any truck begins moving. Inside a motorcycle repair shop, a long metal pole suddenly entered a wide swing path near the entrance area. Long materials require controlled movement paths, managed swing radiuses, and verified clearance throughout transport and positioning operations. Adjacent access areas should remain outside the potential sweep path. While the crane lifted material across the construction site, the suspended load suddenly lost rigging support above the active lifting zone. Suspended loads store massive gravitational force that instantly transfers through rigging when balance, attachment points, or lifting stability fail unexpectedly during heavy crane operations without proper rigging verification. Active crane paths require strict exclusion zones, verified rigging inspection, and controlled load movement at all times. The suspended material generated downward force amplified by swing momentum and load movement. Once the rigging path destabilized, force rapidly redistributed through the lifting system. A suspended load can become an uncontrolled hazard without warning. Keep all access routes completely clear beneath active lifting operations. Inside a crowded market loading zone, a truck reverses with the lift gate still lowered as the rear platform extends through the active work area. Raise and secure lift gates before reversing trucks through active loading or pedestrian areas. Keep workers and pedestrians completely clear of the rear travel path during vehicle movement and loading operations. Fuel drains into an underground access hole when unstable vapor activity suddenly develops beside the tanker truck. Control vapor spaces, grounding systems, and ignition hazards before starting any fuel transfer operation. Secure underground access areas and keep sparks, static discharge, and hot equipment away from active fuel unloading zones. As fuel moved through the transfer pipe, flammable vapors likely accumulated inside the underground access space and traveled back along the airflow path toward the tanker area. Because fuel vapors can react rapidly to ignition sources such as static discharge, electrical equipment, hot surfaces, or sparks, uncontrolled energy release may develop quickly within the vapor-air mixture. Fuel vapors can travel and react far from the liquid source. On a city street, unsecured sheet glass rode on a truck bed when transport vibration gradually reduced load restraint integrity. Large glass panels require verified restraint systems, stable support points, and controlled load distribution throughout transport. Vibration, braking forces, cornering loads, and shifting support conditions can progressively reduce load stability when restraint integrity is inadequate. On a night roadwork site, a turning machine sends its rear swing path straight across an open access route. Don't allow access routes, staging areas, or open walkways to remain beside rotating excavators or cranes. Swing paths must be physically blocked, clearly marked, and controlled by a spotter whenever the upper structure can still rotate. Confirm the operator's rotation plan, keep access gates closed, and hold nearby movement until the attachment and counterweight stop completely. The upper structure rotates with significant momentum, and the counterweight follows a wider travel radius than the visible machine body. In low light, the rear sweep can be harder to judge, especially near barriers, cones, trucks, or narrow walkways. Once rotation begins, the occupied path expands faster than nearby movement can safely react. The swing radius is not empty space. Block it before the machine turns. Inside a busy machine shop, a quick reach toward moving equipment instantly turned into a rapid entanglement hazard beside exposed rotating machine components. Most entanglements begin with one quick reach. The moment urgency overrides patience, your hands enter a machine timeline you can no longer control. Beside a parked wheel loader, a massive tire suddenly changed direction and rolled out of control across the equipment area. Heavy round objects rarely stop where you expect. Once a tire starts rolling, your safest move is creating distance, not trying to outrun or redirect it. Large industrial tires carry extreme weight and rotational momentum, allowing them to continue moving once balance shifts unexpectedly. Uneven ground, body force, or slight directional changes can quickly redirect the tire into an uncontrolled rolling path. Sloped surfaces, loose gravel, nearby equipment vibration, and limited stopping barriers can further increase rolling speed and unpredictability during handling operations around active industrial work zones. Heavy tires can become fast-moving hazards in seconds. Controlled handling methods and clear positioning prevent massive loads from entering active travel paths. A timber truck began creeping forward during unloading as uncontrolled movement redirected the vehicle toward the nearby wall area. Runaway vehicles generate enormous momentum long before they appear to be moving fast. Attempting to physically stop or re-enter an uncontrolled truck places nearby movement inside the narrowing space between moving equipment and fixed structures. A customer slowly drove onto the wash platform during vehicle positioning. Then the car suddenly accelerated and redirected movement through the narrow workspace. Low-speed vehicle movements inside confined work areas leave very limited recovery space when steering or pedal control changes unexpectedly. Workers positioned directly in front of moving vehicles become exposed to rapid forward movement inside the vehicle's travel path. The vehicle accelerated forward unexpectedly while aligned toward the wash platform. In tight operating spaces, even small throttle input creates rapid forward momentum, reducing available stopping distance before force transfers into nearby objects or structures. Vehicle guidance inside workshops and wash bays must keep workers completely outside the direct travel line of the vehicle. Clear stop signals, wheel alignment systems, and side position communication help reduce the risk of sudden, unintended movement inside confined workspaces. On a partially demolished concrete structure, a support column was being cut while still carrying the load of the slab above. Verify the load path before any demolition cut. Do not remove or weaken structural supports until the structure is stabilized with engineered shoring and a controlled demolition plan. While sharpening a knife against the rotating roller, loose clothing suddenly caught the exposed spindle and wrapped into the machine's energized rotation path. Rotating rollers and exposed spindles create dangerous entanglement hazards during close contact tool handling and maintenance tasks. Loose clothing, hand-fed sharpening methods, and unguarded rotation points require physical separation barriers, restricted access zones, and controlled positioning around energized equipment. The rotating roller continuously transferred friction and rotational force across the spindle surface. Once fabric contacted the rotation path, the roller rapidly converted that contact into a wrap-in motion. Exposed rotating rollers can capture loose materials instantly, keep clothing secured, and maintain guarded clearance around energized machinery. A forklift carries the tall slab load through the lane when motorcycle traffic suddenly enters the nearby travel area and the load rapidly shifts outside stable positioning. Keep heavy slab transport routes fully separated from motorcycles, pedestrians, and mixed traffic movement. Use isolation barriers, controlled travel paths, and exclusion zones whenever moving unstable or oversized loads by forklift. Inside the wet processing area, unstable electrical activity suddenly spreads across the energized machine contact surface. Keep electrical equipment isolated from wet work areas and conductive surfaces during operation and maintenance. Use grounding, insulation protection, and dry access controls before touching energized machinery in wet environments. Water across the floor and surrounding metal surfaces can create conductive pathways that allow electrical current to travel outside the intended circuit. When energized equipment contacts wet conductive surfaces, electrical energy can rapidly transfer between the machine and grounded areas. Water and electricity can create fast-moving hidden hazards. On a factory production line, live rollers remained energized while an exposed nip point stayed accessible beside the machine. Live roller systems create continuous draw-in and nip point hazards whenever moving surfaces remain accessible. Machine isolation and guarding must be established before access to the roller area. Inside a tire repair shop, a pressurized heavy tire stored large amounts of compressed energy inside the wheel assembly, with nearby tools and open floor space, leaving no protective barrier if the rim suddenly released. Never, ever service or inflate a large tire in an open work area. Use a tire safety cage, remote inflation line, pressure limit controls, verified rim inspection, and a fully cleared blast path before adding air. Confirm the cage door is latched before pressurization begins, and keep all activity outside the marked release path. A heavy tire stores compressed energy across the bead, rim, and sidewall assembly. Damage, improper seating, excessive pressure, corrosion, or structural weakness can rapidly release that energy, turning the wheel assembly into uncontrolled moving equipment. Compressed air is stored energy. Control the blast path before pressure rises. On the rig floor, oil was applied to a suspended assembly before powered movement lifted it away and the floor drill component broke apart. Never, ever inspect or open floor equipment beneath a recently lifted assembly until the operation is stopped, the suspended load is secured, and the component is verified stable. Inside the machine shop, a spinning lathe suddenly hurled a metal workpiece across the room without warning. Rotating machines punish tiny setup errors. One missed clamping check can turn ordinary material into a projectile aimed wherever you chose to stand. High-speed rotational force multiplies imbalance, vibration, and loose clamping pressure within seconds. Once a workpiece loses secure contact with the chuck, Stored rotational energy can redirect material at high speed. Even slight alignment problems, uneven tightening, worn jaws, or improper setup angles can rapidly destabilize the entire rotating assembly during active machining operations under continuous load and sustained high rotational speed conditions inside confined industrial production environments with nearby access areas positioned close to exposed rotating equipment components. Rotating equipment can turn loose material into a projectile instantly. Proper clamping checks, guarding, and staying outside the rotational path reduce exposure to uncontrolled ejection hazards. A tipper moved with its bed raised and suddenly contacted an overhead structure as the upper section rapidly shifted downward toward the truck body. Do not drive with an elevated dump bed beneath overhead structures. Bridges, utility lines, and gantries can rapidly lose structural stability or transfer heavy impact force back into the vehicle during overhead contact events. During unloading operations involving packaged pyrotechnic products, a sudden ignition event rapidly spread through the surrounding loading space. Never, ever handle fireworks or energetic materials without strict ignition control procedures grounded, storage methods, and protected unloading zones. One spark, impact, or friction point can rapidly spread heat and pressure through nearby materials. Firecrackers contain tightly packed combustible compounds that rapidly expand into heated gas when activated. In confined stacks and transport loads, pressure and heat can quickly transfer between nearby packages and spread force throughout the unloading area. Energetic cargo must be unloaded slowly, carefully, and far from ignition sources or impact hazards. When combustible materials are stacked closely together, one small ignition source can rapidly escalate conditions across the entire loading zone. Inside a restaurant work area, electrical work proceeded on an energized circuit when electrical potential bridged an unintended path within the system. Electrical systems require verified isolation, lockout protection, and zero energy confirmation before exposed conductors remain accessible. Energized circuits can create unintended electrical paths whenever isolation is incomplete or absent. During tree removal beside a home, a large limb was separated while stored tension, weight, and release forces remained within the branch movement path. Tree limbs contain stored tension, compression, and suspended weight that can rapidly alter movement paths after separation. Rigging systems, controlled sectioning, and managed release paths are required wherever large limbs remain partially supported. Tree removal is governed by load paths, stored tension, and release forces. Maintain controlled support and verified movement paths throughout limb separation operations. Tree work is controlled by release paths, not just cut points. Position the lift clear, secure the limb, then make the cut. A suspended concrete wall panel shifts during the crane lift as the load path rapidly moves outside stable alignment. Keep completely clear of suspended concrete panels while rigging tension and load balance change during lifting operations. Use controlled lift paths, exclusion zones, and stable rigging to reduce rapid swing or shifting movement. During unloading inside the trailer, the rear trailer cover suddenly started closing while unloading activity continued beneath the moving panel. Secure trailer covers, lift panels, and rear doors before unloading begins inside enclosed trailer spaces. Keep forklifts and personnel completely clear of overhead closing paths during loading and unloading operations. The rear trailer cover was part of an automatic closing system, so once the mechanism activated, the panel continued moving through its preset closing path. Inside the trailer, that moving overhead panel reduced clearance quickly while unloading operations continued inside the confined space. Unsecured trailer panels can automatically move without warning. Secure every overhead cover before unloading starts. At a stone yard, stacked blocks shift while open access remains beneath an unstable load path. Stacked stone blocks rely on stable support surfaces, balanced load distribution, and maintained alignment throughout storage and handling operations. Uneven support conditions, shifting contact points, or changing load. Paths can rapidly reduce stack stability and release stored gravitational force. Inside a busy material handling area, a powered vehicle and a designated walking route converged within the same narrow travel corridor, with stacked materials tightening the approach. Shared travel corridors create overlapping movement paths, restricted visibility, and reduced separation distances between vehicle routes and walking routes. Physical separation, protected crossings, and controlled route design are required wherever travel paths intersect. Mark crossings slow vehicle movement and prevent unplanned access before the corridor becomes active. Powered vehicles require distance to change speed, direction, and travel path once movement begins. Blind zones created by loads, equipment structures, and restricted clearance corridors can reduce visibility, while overlapping travel routes reduce available separation distance. Reaction time, braking delay, and steering arc increase the space needed for route control. Shared travel corridors create persistent route conflict hazards. Design the route before movement starts. Physical separation, protected crossings, and controlled route design reduce overlap between vehicle movement paths and walking routes. A stacked machine load suddenly shifted sideways during active loading operations beside moving equipment, unstable ground, and narrow maneuvering space. The safest place during unstable movement is often farther away than feels necessary. Distance buys reaction time when material decides to move unexpectedly. A long board suddenly swung across the outdoor work setup during single-person lifting movement near stacked materials and active movement paths beside unstable footing and tightly packed construction supplies spread across the narrow workspace. Oversized materials extend your blind spots. If you cannot see the full swing path, assume someone else may already be standing inside it. Long boards act like rotating levers when lifted unevenly or turned too quickly. Their extended length amplifies swing force and creates unexpected travel paths around nearby equipment during sudden directional changes, especially when footing, grip strength, visibility, and spacing conditions suddenly change during handling operations. Oversized material can become unpredictable with one sudden pivot during movement. Team coordination, controlled lifting angles, and clear spacing help maintain safer movement paths around shared outdoor work areas with nearby obstacles, changing surfaces, active equipment, and limited maneuvering space. An excavator bucket suddenly lost alignment and swung sideways across the surrounding work area near unstable trench edges and active machine movement paths. Heavy equipment creates invisible boundaries. If the machine can still move, treat its full swing radius as occupied space, even when the operator hasn't moved yet. A forklift carried a massive metal spool across the yard. Then the unstable load suddenly shifted and redirected force through the nearby work area. Never, ever transport oversized or unbalanced loads on a forklift without proper securing, load centering, and stability checks. A shifting load can rapidly destabilize the machine or redirect heavy movement around the mast and travel path. A restricted electrical substation in Brazil suddenly lit up after unauthorized movement entered the fenced utility area. Never, ever enter restricted electrical utility zones for non-operational access or unintended use. Do recognize warning signs, perimeter barriers, and energized infrastructure as active high-voltage hazard areas requiring controlled clearance at all times. Inside a trenching operation, excavation continued beside an unsupported wall when soil and rock suddenly lost sidewall stability. Trench stability depends on soil conditions, moisture content, vibration, surcharge loads, and sidewall support systems. Unsupported trench walls require shoring, shielding, sloping, or benching whenever sidewall stability cannot be maintained. While positioned above the energized transformer frame, electrical clearance was lost near exposed high-voltage components, and an arc formed across the connection path. High-voltage transformers create instant arc flash hazards when exposed conductors, improper isolation, or unsafe positioning enter the electrical clearance area. Energized maintenance zones require full lockout verification, insulated access methods, and strict separation from live components during servicing. As electrical potential bridged the air gap, ionized air formed a conductive path between energized components. Rapid energy transfer occurred through the newly established arc channel. Electricity gives no warning before energy release. Always isolate and verify de-energization before entering high-voltage areas. An excavator reverses toward a building wall while the counterweight rapidly moves through the narrow clearance space behind the machine. Keep completely clear of excavator counterweight swing zones and reversing paths near walls, structures, or fixed barriers. Maintain protected escape space and exclusion areas wherever slewing or reversing movement can rapidly reduce surrounding clearance. At a furnace station, an ignition source reached an uncertain fuel atmosphere within the burner opening. Furnace ignition systems require verified fuel conditions, controlled startup sequences, and confirmed fuel-air balance before ignition energy is introduced. Uncertain burner conditions, unverified fuel accumulation, or abnormal startup states indicate increased ignition path hazards. Inside an automated board line, one open access point sits beside a gantry head moving across the table, turning routine access into live machine exposure. Don't assume an automated board line is safe just because visible motion has paused. Motors, drives, vacuum tooling, control logic, and restart commands can still hold movement capability. Open access points require verified energy isolation, lockout protection, blocked automatic restart, and zero energy confirmation before any guard, panel, or entry point remains exposed. A gantry system moves through stored electrical and mechanical energy in servo motors, rails, belts, brakes, pneumatic circuits, and vacuum heads. If control energy remains active, the program sequence can re-engage the head quickly, sending horizontal motion back across the table without enough warning for safe access. The machine workspace remains active while movement capability exists. Isolate, lock out, test for zero energy, and close the access point before restarting. Inside a busy workshop, a loose cable drifted into the rotation path of a live shaft assembly. Loose cables, hoses, and flexible materials can be drawn into exposed rotating equipment when they enter the machine's rotation path. Maintain separation between rotating components and unsecured material at all times. In a narrow alleyway, steel cutting with an angle grinder suddenly becomes unstable when the spinning blade binds and redirects the tool sharply away from the intended cut path. High-speed abrasive wheels store massive rotational energy. When a blade pinches inside a cut, the machine can rapidly redirect torque and movement through the tool body before stable control is regained. The grinder disc became trapped between closing metal surfaces, abruptly slowing rotation at the contact point. That resistance redirected torque backward through the tool body in a sudden kickback movement. Control the cut before the cut controls the tool. Proper grip, blade guarding, and body positioning help interrupt kickback movement paths. At a night loading area, a moving conveyor created an active draw-in path as material movement extended to the belt edge beside the conveyor frame. Conveyor systems require guarded access, protected walkways, emergency stop capability, and controlled material flow wherever moving belts create draw-in points, pinch points, or restricted clearance areas. At a delivery truck, rear doors were opened after load movement altered cargo stability behind the door system. Cargo loads require restraint systems, bracing, load bars, and controlled load distribution throughout transport. Shifting cargo can create stored force against door systems when load geometry changes during travel. Cargo loads require restraint systems, bracing, load bars, and controlled load distribution throughout transport. Shifting cargo can create stored force against door systems when load geometry changes during travel. A closed truck door can be holding back an unstable load. Check, brace, and open from a protected position before unloading. Balanced above a trench, a running chainsaw cuts through the same timber supporting the work position, and the load path suddenly separates beneath the structure. Cutting the same structure supporting an elevated work position removes the remaining stable load path beneath the operating area. Once the support structure separates, gravity rapidly redirects movement through the exposed zone. A giant cable reel is being guided down a staircase. Then the spool suddenly accelerates and rolls rapidly through the building entrance. Heavy cylindrical loads rapidly build momentum once downhill movement begins. Without mechanical restraint, rolling mass and acceleration can quickly exceed stable manual control. As the reel moved downward, gravitational force continuously increased rotational speed and kinetic energy. Once traction and control were reduced, the spool became a rapidly moving rolling hazard through the surrounding area. Gravity quickly overpowers unsecured heavy loads on inclined surfaces. Use engineered lowering systems whenever large mass and elevation combine. At a roadside loading area, heavy equipment entered a sloped unloading path when gravity and ground angle altered the machine's stability conditions. Mobile equipment unloading requires stable ground conditions, controlled support geometry, verified ramp integrity, and managed movement paths whenever slope, gravity, or load transfer can influence stability. The skid steer operator raised the overloaded bucket beside the truck bed. Then an incorrect control input rapidly moved the machine outside its stability range. Heavy equipment becomes extremely unpredictable when operators do not fully understand machine controls, hydraulic functions, load limits, steering response, and stability behavior. Never operate skid steers without verified training and complete familiarity with every control function. The raised bucket shifted the loader's center of gravity upward and outward. Incorrect control input combined with uneven load transfer quickly pushed the machine beyond its stability limit. Confusion inside heavy equipment can rapidly reduce machine stability. Training and control familiarity help maintain safe load handling and equipment control. Near a narrow foundation edge, stubborn formwork suddenly shifts free during removal and redirects movement across the work surface. Using body force as leverage near an open edge rapidly reduces stable positioning when materials release unexpectedly. Sudden movement can quickly redirect. At a concrete truckwork area, vehicle movement began while restricted clearance remained along the cab-side travel path beside the front wheel area. Concrete trucks create extensive blind zones around the cab, steps, front wheel path, and adjacent travel areas. Vehicle movement should only occur after blind zones, restricted clearance areas, and travel paths have been verified clearly. Don't forget to share what you learned today in the comments. Your insight could save a life. Take care.